Good evening. I'm going to call the special budget hearing of May 16, 2011 to order. Will you please rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Francisco. Hotchkiss.
Here.
House.
Here.
Rouse.
Here.
Self. White. Mayor Schneider.
Here. Are there any items that's not on the agenda, any public comment for items not on today's agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to close the general public comment. There will be opportunity for public comment after the budget hearing presentation, for sure. Chief Sanchez.
Good evening, Mayor Schneider and Council. Thank you for allowing us to come here and meet with you tonight. And wanted to just tell you briefly how we're going to do this. My staff and I will rotate around, and then at the end we're going to take some questions. And we're going to start by giving you a department overview today. We're also going to talk about the general fund, expenditures and revenues, options not included in the budget that I think you'll be happy with. Our police staffing paradigm, P3, and divisional highlights is what we're going to start with. But before that, I just want to share with you that your police department continues to work hard. They continue to put in a lot of hours. In fact, many times we even go out of state to get bad guys. And recently, as you all know, some of our detectives went to another state to retrieve some of those individuals that we believe need to meet justice here in the county of Santa Barbara. So we're really happy to share with you that they continue to work very, very hard. One of the things that we won't dive into very heavily tonight that I promised you last year, if you remember an update on our cold cases, we have over 20 unsolved murders here in Santa Barbara. And we continue to work some of those homicides even today with one person. But we're coming up with some pretty good things. Some date back to the early 60s. And we continue to go all over this country interviewing individuals trying to solve those. So other than just the fresh stuff, if you will, that we get, we continue to work towards bringing some of those cases to closure and stay in contact with even those families from the 60s about the murder victims from their families. So we continue to attempt to do that. Our total staffing, as you look, we have 201 total permanent staff. We have 12 managers, 189 employees and supervisors, and we have between 15 and 20 hourly employees, which really put in over 18,000 hours of work for us. The org chart is up there. We won't go through it line by line. I will just highlight a couple of areas that we've changed for the new fiscal year. If you look over to your right, under Community and Media Relations team, prior to this will take place on July 1. I've moved the public information officer to my office along with the beat coordinator, DARE and PAL. Although we have suspended DARE for the time and we have called the officer from PAL back to patrol, this will be under my office. And the reason that I'm going to have direct input here is due to the fact that over the last year to 18 months, many of the community-related issues have come directly to my office, and we want to make sure that none of that gets lost in the shuffle. So that sergeant will be the public information officer and will also supervise those other individuals, including our beat coordinator, of which currently we only have one. To the left, under administrative services, the only big thing, I guess you could say, that we've done is we've moved our communications center lieutenant and communications center and the communications center trainer from patrol division to the administrative services division captain. The reason is, as you know, we continue to attempt very, very diligently to try to get the numbers up in terms of dispatchers, of which we are down a few. And we believe that because the administrative services captain handles recruitment and hiring and backgrounds, we wanted to move that from patrol under his purview. At the very bottom to the right, you'll see it says TPF, Tactical Patrol Force Restorative Policing. That's something we're going to talk about towards the end of our presentation tonight, about the enhancement of that program. That will continue to be under patrol, but again, in a few minutes, we'll discuss the enhancement of that program for both the State Street corridor as well as the Milpas corridor. Chief staff, pretty easy. Myself, the deputy chief, we have 2 sergeants assigned to that office, 4 officers and 8 non-sworn, giving us a total of 16. We won't go line by line. I'm just going to give you the box to the right, and we're going to save my comments for some questions that might come later. In investigative division by work detail, we have a captain, 4 sergeants, 19 detectives, and 1 lab tech. If you look at the person section, when you look at 1 sergeant and 6 detectives, these are folks handling the Part 1s, assaults, burglaries, those types of, the burglaries are handled by property section, but our person section, which handles domestic violence, assaults, all those sorts of things, what person sections does. Property section, self-explanatory, property crimes. Our narcotics section has 1 sergeant and 5 detectives. We continually stay busy on that. Our youth services section is 1 sergeant and 4 detectives. These are detectives and a sergeant that are assigned basically our gang investigations. This is not the team that is out there in the field. These are detectives who work alongside them. So our gang unit is in good shape. Our administrative services division by work detail, we have a captain, 2 lieutenants, 1 IT manager, 2 sergeants, 18 dispatchers, 15 record specialists, and 10 miscellaneous specialists. We won't get into the weeds here, but because last year we did lose, or this year we will lose the manager position in records, non-sworn, we have a lieutenant who is going to do that job as well as his other duties. So we are not replacing that 1 position that you'll find later. We're 1 down. That's the 1 down. It was a non-sworn manager whose duties are now part of the lieutenant. And my captain will talk a little bit more about that when we get to his division.
Just a second, Chief.
Yes.
I just want to make sure, the people by the door, if you could please not block the doorway and have a seat. And if we have more people come in, we can open up room 15 as well, but I just don't want the doorway blocked. So and there are definitely seats all over the place. If you'd like to sit down, you're welcome to. Okay. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Continuing with our administrative services division, we have our special events section that stays busy all year long. We have a sergeant and 1 special events officer who handle all special events citywide. Also, that sergeant now, because we eliminated the supervisor in animal control, that same sergeant also has animal control officers and also the permits and the permit specialist. So we're spreading the work around as best we can. In our patrol division, we have 6 beats, as you know. We have 6 patrol teams. We have 3 lieutenants, 7 sergeants, and 57 team officers. If you look to the right box, it has a captain, 4 lieutenants, 12 sergeants, 81 officers, and 13 non-sworn assigned to patrol division. If you look on the bigger side of the chart, we have our traffic, our motor sergeant, and 6 officers. Our TPF, which is our tactical patrol force, and our gang suppression team, which is 1 sergeant and 4 officers working gangs in the field in conjunction with our YSS detectives and sergeant. And then our K-9 and drink and driver team is a total of 3 officers. Last year, we presented to you an idea that has been in effect for a while, doing a great job. That's our CIT team, which stands for Criminal Impact Team. This is 1 sergeant and 4 officers. Their main duties, they do a variety of things, but their main duties is dealing with Part 1 crime suspects, parolees, 290 registrants, and alike. They do a lot of work with parole and probation to address the issue of our parolees that are assigned to our community, and they just keep a very, very close watch on those individuals. In our parking enforcement, we have 1 sergeant and 12 parking enforcement officers. We are currently looking for more. It is a revenue stream, and we are diligently working with that. Over the last few months, we have brought back several retired individuals, retired officers, to help us with the many backgrounds that we have going on. In a little bit, we're going to talk to you about how we're doing with the hiring and the overhiring that you've allowed us to do, which we've been doing for a couple of years. And we continue to do that. And as we get further into the presentation, you'll see just how close we are to where we should be. And we should be further than what I'm saying now, but we will talk about that towards the end of our presentation. Again, I'll end right now before I turn it over to the Deputy Chief for a few slides. The criminal impact team did not just fall from the sky, obviously. We had to take from other specialty units to put that team together. But we felt with the many parolees that we have in our city, not just in the county, with the many parolees that we have in our city, we needed to keep a very close eye on them because recidivism is an issue with parolees, in our opinion. And we needed a team of officers who was going to go out there and make sure that they are watched very closely. And I believe they've done a fantastic job. I send you usually weekly or bi-weekly the stats of how they're doing. These officers sacrifice a lot. They do not have a regular work day. We can have them work days tomorrow and midnights the next day, depending on what our strategy is and what type of individuals we're looking for. We're in the business of keeping our community safe. That's our business. And from time to time, we have to shuffle people around. Recently, I read that the city is shuffling officers around. That's an inaccurate statement. The city is not shuffling officers around. The chief of police is shuffling people around. That's what you pay me to do. And with my staff and with our supervisors and managers, we attempt very diligently to stay on task with the strategy. And sometimes the strategy changes daily depending on the crime that's occurring. So we're excited to be working for you. We know there are challenges ahead. We have some visions for the future that we'll share today, especially for the long term, because we believe, because our number one job is to keep the entire community safe, sometimes we have to be very honest with you and tell you what we can and cannot do and why, and what our resources and what our needs are. People ask us all the time, how many officers do you need? Well, it depends on what level of service you want. And for us, we want to be known as a full service operation. I arrived here over 10 years ago and we had 150, but times were better then. And we had a grant that allowed us to be at 150, but unfortunately those monies went away and we had to make some other changes. But I will tell you, I was very happy when we were at 150 when I had 6 beat coordinators citywide instead of 1. But we have to do something to continue to have officers in black and whites answering calls for service, because that's what the community deserves. And my obligation is to make sure that we get people there on time and to help our community with all that we have. So that said, we'll take some questions later on staffing if you have, but for now I'll turn it over to the Deputy Chief for a few slides and then I'll come back to you in a little bit.
Deputy Chief Mannix.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of Council. Deputy Chief Frank Mannix. I'm going to be taking you through the next part of the presentation. First, I'd like to discuss a quick snapshot of where we are with our response times on our Priority 1 calls for service. These are our highest priority calls. I didn't get into a complete CompStat presentation here because today is a budget presentation, but I did just want to point out that with our Priority 1 response times, the current month is represented by the light blue, and as you can tell, it's fairly static from where it's been in the last few months from prior years. These other top lines here represent a total response time. We're currently looking at about 6 minutes. You can see that overall it has drifted higher in the past, so we're talking about September, October, November. It was up a little bit, but it's come back down for our Priority 1s. I can tell you that for our Priority 2s and 3s, we are seeing in the last few months of the calendar year, we saw a trend upwards. However, for the first 4 months of this calendar year, they have come back down. So they trended up for a while, and now they're trending back down. So this is a review of our Part 1 crimes. Part 1 crimes are the crimes that are reported to the FBI. They're listed right here on the side. They're also sometimes referred to as index crimes. This is what the FBI tracks in order for them to get a general idea of crime in the United States. Police departments across the country report these crimes to the FBI. It's not an exact tally of crime because there's a very comprehensive set of rules as to how these crimes get reported to the FBI, but it does serve as a useful tool when measured against any single city year over year to indicate crime trends. Different police departments have different ways of reporting crime, which is why it's difficult to compare this set of data to agencies across the country. But when you're comparing them internally, it's much more useful. A couple values that I want to point out to you real quick is if you look here, you'll see an 8% increase in violent crime as of the most current month I had available when we put this presentation together. I'm happy to report that we have, as of about an hour ago, gotten the most current data, and this 8% increase has now dropped to a 1% increase. So I was unable to change that in time for our presentation. With crime, we do see, a seesaw level in crime, and I would like to point out that if you look right over here, you'll see that it was the year ended with a 17% total decrease in violent crime last year. So to get what is now a 1% increase is pretty static. If we look right at the bottom, we'll notice this 4% increase, an overall reduction in total Part 1 crimes. This is mainly led by a reduction in property crimes, and once again, the current value is a 5% reduction. So this has actually gotten better over the last month than I was able to report in this data. So this is a quick snapshot of where we were this time last year, and again, this time last year we were talking about a 24% reduction and then 23% reduction in property crime. So it's pretty tough to get year-over-year reductions, but to have our crime reduced by 23% last year and then followed up by an additional year-to-date 5% reduction presently, those are two reductions year-over-year, so that's a very good sign. The main purpose of this chart is it really shows our appropriations by major object, and what I'm trying to show here is our department is heavily budgeted with salary and benefits. You can see that 87% of our budget is comprised by salary and benefits, so when we're looking to make budget adjustments, these other costs are very stagnant and there's very little room. These are allocated costs, or electricity, liability insurance, things that we essentially have no control over. Equipment, you can see, is a very small budget. And then our supplies and services, gasoline, bullets, things that we just have to buy to make our department run. So when we're looking to make adjustments, you can see it really does have to come out of salary and benefits. And then this year we're presenting a $33.9 million budget. Here's some of the same information in greater detail. You can see that our salaries and benefits have actually increased this fiscal year under the budget that we are proposing by 5.4%. This is a status quo budget, which means that there are no appreciable changes in our staffing levels in this budget. But if we're increasing overall budget 5.4%, where is that coming from? That's because our new employees who have only been here a few years are entitled to step increases and things of that nature that will just have automatic roll-ups. And we just have to budget for those, and this is how it turned out this year. Is we've had a lot of new employees that we've hired in the last 5 years. They're getting their step increases. So even though we are seeing an increase in salary and benefits, this is not going to represent an increase in overall staffing levels. Supplies and services have gone down a relatively small percentage, 5.7%. Allocated costs are relatively stagnant at 3.6% reduction. Equipment, we've seen a slight reduction. It's a relatively small budget. of only about $20,000 difference here. And then we do have some special projects money that we're able to program into the budget for this year. This is a pie chart showing our major revenues. And the real major revenue, as you all know, is our parking citation revenue. You can see it's virtually 50% of the $5.4 million departmental revenues that we're able to bring in. We do have a number of other revenue sources that are very important to us. Fees and charges are, for example, the licensing fees when people come in and get themselves fingerprinted, vehicle release fees, things of that nature. That represents 14% of our budget. Intergovernmental tends to be grants that we have gotten from different governmental sources, and we were able to budget that here. Animal control licensing fees go here. It's a relatively small amount. 4% is Prop 172. That's basically a sales tax. We get a little sliver of the sales tax that the voters voted was going to be allocated just for public safety. So we do get about 4% of our departmental revenue represented by that value right there. Traffic safety is given to us by the state of California each year. It's a very significant 9% of our budget. We do get a small percentage of the street sweeping reimbursement. This is to cover our administrative costs of carrying out the street sweeping program. Our staff has to process the tickets, review the complaints that come in from street sweeping, adjudicate the tickets, et cetera, et cetera. So we do get a small sliver of that pie. This is the same information that we were just able to break down in a little greater detail. The big difference here that I want to point out is you see this 50% difference in intergovernmental, and that's some grants that we're just no longer getting. DUI grants, CalGRIP grants, et cetera, that we will just not be budgeting for this year. So although it's a large sum of money, approximately $500,000, there's also an offset in that you're not paying for the things that those grants were covering the cost. So you won't be paying for the overtime, et cetera, et cetera. So we should be able to budget for that relatively painlessly. Now I'd like to discuss how our strength is distributed throughout the department. And strength, I'm talking about sworn strength. As you can see, if we look on the very bottom here, last year we did reduce the size of our sworn strength by 3 officers. I think you all recall that. This year is a status quo budget, so we have prepared a budget that once again represents 137 officers. And then this is how they are distributed by rank. So you can see 109 officers, we went down to 106, and we're currently presenting 106. This is how it is distributed throughout the patrol division. You'll notice that we are going from 5 lieutenants currently to 4 lieutenants in this current budget, and that's because we've transferred 1 lieutenant out of the patrol division who is currently managing the communications center, and we have moved the management of that over to the administrative services section, so that lieutenant is simply being moved to another part in the department. There's not a reduction in overall strength. But for patrol division, obviously there is 1 reduction. And this is how it boils out with a little more detail. You can see our team strength for the last 3 years has been static at 57 officers. I'll go into more detail later, but we currently have 50 officers who are actually carrying out this function. But in terms of our staffing authorization, we're authorized for 57 as we have been for the past 3 years. My point being that although we have had to make some adjustments last year by losing a few officers, none came out of team strength. They came out of more administrative parts in the department. And then, as you can see, 81 officers 2 years ago, 81 officers currently in this fiscal year, and then 81 officers predicted for next fiscal year. So when we're looking at the officers who are actually in the field doing the police work, there's no change.
Mr. House has a question.
Yes, Chief Mannix. You've done the 57 team strength, and you made the comment that in reality, like on the street, 50 was the number, and there's 7. That's those who are on sick leave or some other maybe they're in Iraq or something? I mean, what's happening with those other 7, or are they in the academy and we're hopeful to have them on board soon?
You're correct in all assumptions. We have 1 officer on military leave. We have 2 officers out injured. We have several officers that are on a maternity disposition. And I will go into greater detail in future slides.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
This is the investigative division. They have authorized strength of 24, 24, and 24. You can see officers really are detectives, unchanged for the past 3 fiscal years. The Admin Services Division. 2 years ago we had 14. Last year we dropped down to 11. This is because the 3 officers that we reduced in size last year came out of this division. They were the beat coordinators. We reduced our staffing in that level to accommodate the necessary adjustments we had to make. And then this year it's 7 because we have moved some of this 11 to different parts. And the chief talked about the movement of the officers to the beat coordinator and media relations unit that he's attached to his section. I know he's going to talk a little more about that on a future slide. And this is the same information by detail. And you can see that the PAL and DARE and beat coordinators, these 4 officers have been moved to the chief's staff, so you no longer see them represented in this fiscal year. And then, of course, 1 lieutenant. There's now 2 lieutenants because the communications lieutenant has moved to the Admin Services Division.
Mr. Hotchkiss has a question.
Deputy Chief, is this the appropriate time to ask you what that difference is between having fewer beat coordinators, what, in the point of view of service to the community, to service to people, many of them may be here now?
If it's appropriate time for you, it's appropriate time for me.
Fine for me.
The beat coordinator unit was originally established with 6 beat coordinators. And the mission of that unit was to work on addressing recurrent beat problems that are recurring over and over again with frequency, and to try and find long-term solutions to those problems rather than simply addressing the problem for that day, handling it, making an arrest, dispersing the crowd, giving the warning, and then clearing, and then coming back to the exact same problem tomorrow. So the mission of the beat coordinator unit is to try and work in partnership with other city entities and community-based organizations to try and find permanent solutions to those problems, and then also to act as a liaison with the patrol staff who actually go out and handles those types of calls for service. This program was originally implemented in 1988, and it was a big paradigm shift for the department. At that time, community policing was a brand new idea, and it was not immediately popular with the police department because the chief at that time was very visionary, and he was determined he was going to make it work, and he did. And he not only established this unit, but he changed the thinking of the people on patrol at the time, and I was one of them. And I saw with my own eyes how the department became much more accepting of the idea of community policing, and we changed how we did business, and we respond to calls for service and think of solutions to problems as opposed to simply handling the problem and clearing. Now, community policing is a labor-intensive phenomenon. It takes more time to do community policing than to simply handle the call and leave, because you have to make contacts with different city entities, with different members of the public. You have to be more creative to do community policing. So it's labor-intensive for the patrol officer, and it's labor-intensive for the beat coordinator, whose job it is to try and coordinate the activities on the beat.
So sort of neighborhood policing and really getting to know a particular part of the city, if that's your beat.
Yes, you know, when I remember going to training on how to be community-oriented, and I remember a very old police officer from LAPD says, well, this is nothing more than getting out of your car and taking care of your beat. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell, taking care of your beat. having a sense of ownership of your beat and trying to do the best you can for the people who live in that particular beat. It takes time. Yeah, it takes time to take care of something, but it's nothing magical. It's just an attitude and a philosophy about how you're going to handle your workload. With the loss of some of the beat coordinators, we have lost that point of the spear on community policing. There is no doubt. However, the philosophy of community policing has still remained in the department. So when you say, how has it impacted us? Well, we don't have that designated officer whose job it is to specifically respond to that beat problem, and seek out these long-term solutions. We don't have 6 of them anymore. We currently have 2, which are being offered in this budget. So we do miss those positions, but it's just something we've had to flex and to accommodate to address this dreadful crisis.
One of the things that, that hurts us a lot is not being able to be more proactive. And I think you've all heard that from the community. I certainly have. And it's been very difficult. And when the officers in the black and whites are chasing the radio, it's hard, quite frankly, because I tried it also 100 years ago, to be proactive and still handle those calls for service that I personally asked them to get to quickly. So the issue of dealing with that is big for us. The issue for the community is always the quality of life issues. Recently, when I tried to explain how wonderfully we were dealing with the robbery and the burglary problem to a business person, they said, that's fine and dandy, but what about that abandoned car behind my business that you don't pay attention to? See, to that person, that's very important. Our officers are very good at what they do. They want to be more proactive, and hopefully they will do so. But sometimes it's hard, and I think when I inherited the 6 beat coordinators, that certainly made it a lot easier at the time, but especially for the community to have that liaison. But again, we've had to shift. We started getting the gang homicides. We started with other issues, the burglary issue, the parolee issue, the sex registrant issue, and we had to move people around, and that's where we are today. But our goal is to someday be more proactive.
Okay, thanks for the answer about the beat cops.
Thank you. Asked the second time, please do not block the doorway. If you could take a seat. I just want to keep that doorway open. There's a full house in here, so thank you. And there's plenty of spaces throughout the room. Thank you.
Very brief.
Yeah, Mr. House,
Yes,
briefly, yes.
and to Chief Sanchez and Deputy Chief Mannix, I appreciate the last remark, because I was going to really ask to clarify. As one who, when I was the president of the Merchants Association on Milpa Street, really benefited, our association benefited greatly, and East Side Study Group too, back in the 90s, mid-90s, from the relationships that we had created with Officer Gillingham and Noel Rivas, and then subsequent to them, and how wonderful it was to have that relationship. Is it your goal that we at some point restore or come back to having 4, or I don't know if we'll be able to get to 6 at some point, but some number like that of beat coordinators or that kind of function, if it's not in this budget cycle at some point? Do you see the extra cost that it takes bearing fruit in the proactive way that works?
Well, clearly, when you're proactive, it's tremendous, and I think the community gains a lot from that. I think the goal is to really try to find out what level of service do you want, because we have to make choices. There are certain things that we don't get to as quickly, or we've made it a different priority because we have other priorities this week. But at the end of the day, our goal is to be full service, and to be full service and address all the needs of the city, we need more resources. So it really comes to what level of service do we want to provide? Clearly, we provide great service. We want to be better. Our goal is to continue keeping our streets safe. If we get the 4 more beat coordinators, that'd be great. But we can't tie them down to that. We have people in black and whites. We want officer safety. Officer safety is always an issue. I know it is for you. You've all told me that. So we just want plenty of people, plenty of resources to get to that level of service that we want to be at. But we understand the financial realities, but to be honest with you, that's where we are as a public safety entity to try to get the resources to be able to make that a goal. But it's not the goal. The goal is to be full service and to be much more proactive than we currently are.
And your goal has also to do, and I think, Frank, you're talking about keeping community-oriented policing as a central theme, as a key part of the corporate culture of the police department. That was a big shift back in the late 80s, and you're intending to continue with that. Whether or not we have a grant like we did during the 90s for the 150, which we had that federal grant, which then went away. But that is a key central theme, isn't it, for the future as well?
It's a central theme. The department has not abandoned its community policing philosophy. However, with staffing challenges comes the reality that with fewer officers, you are unable to do the same level of service as you did in the past. We can provide adequate police protection with the level of officers we currently have. We can definitely do it. We can do it with less. We just can't do it the same. And when our staffing levels are adjusted, we have to adjust our levels of service accordingly. And one of them has been the staffing of the community beat coordinators. And as I mentioned earlier, community policing as a paradigm is labor intensive because, and as our labor pool gets more and more challenged with calls for service workload, they have to adjust by clearing and handling the next level, the next call for service that's waiting for their response. And as you have fewer officers in the field, you will have to do that more and more frequently.
The other part of this community policing is that word community. We're continually seeking community input. They give it to us. They give us suggestions. And that's important. That's an important part of this aspect. Community policing doesn't mean just the police do it. It means the community does it. But I believe, and I've seen in my 10 plus years here, how in this community they do care.
And then we'll have a little greater discussion on that in subsequent slides.
Thank you. Please continue.
This is the sworn strength distribution by chief staff. We discussed this a little bit already, so I won't go over into too much. But you can see with the increase of the officer strength, this would be 2 beat coordinators, the DARE and PAL officer would be assigned here. And then the increase in sergeant is the PIO and the sergeant who supervises those officers. The chief's office takes many complaints from the public, and it's very efficient to have the chief having this work unit that he can immediately interact with to address those community policing type issues. They come in with complaints from, well, some of them come in through your office and they're forwarded to us. And it is very convenient for the chief to have that kind of immediacy of resource. This is some of the same information showing the distribution of the workforce by division. I won't go into too much because we spent a lot of time on this already, but once again, we had 140, 137, 137. It's pretty well straight across the board. Status quo budget. I'm going to talk about the concepts of hiring, over-hiring, and I want to go over some quick definitions just so we're all on the same page. But authorized strength are the number of sworn positions that council has approved the police department to hire based upon the adopted budget. So that is what we're authorized. As I've shown you before, it's a status quo budget of 137 authorized positions. Operational strength is how many of those officers we have hired at the current time. So we're authorized 137, maybe we've hired 135 or 132 because we're in the process of hiring people. Functional strength is how many of those officers are actually able to show up for duty. And we talked about some of those vacancies from Councilmember Haas about some on military leave, we have some on injury, some are on other types of leaves, and that is functional strength. In other words, how many people are actually doing police work, from the chief of police on to the brand new trainee police officer who's doing his field training. They're in the field providing police services. And then finally, vacancies are simply unfilled authorized strength positions. And then overhire is when we're hiring positions in excess of our authorized strength. It's helpful to look at this as subsets of each other. You've got our big number of our authorized. Out of the authorized, how many are operational? Out of the operational, how many are functional doing police work? So this is the group right here that actually does the police work. And this is the slide that tells quite a lot of information, so I'm going to spend a few minutes on it. In fiscal year 10, we are authorized 140. And as I've discussed previously, we've reduced by 3. But I want to really confine our view here as we go over column by column, try and look vertically here. When we presented this information 2 years ago, we were operational with 133. And I think you'll remember a couple of years ago when we presented our budget that we were talking about our vacancies that we were trying very aggressively to fill, the 7 vacancies. Well, there they are represented right there. Those were the 7 vacancies of unfilled positions. And then out of those 7 vacancies, we had 121 that were actually responding for police work, which coincidentally is a 12 officer reduction, which is what we have right now, and I'm going to go into that in a minute. But you can see sometimes there's a significant difference between authorized strength, operational strength, and functional strength. This is as of today. As of today, we are authorized 137, and we've filled 137 positions. So we no longer have the 7 vacancies that we've had in the past. And this has been a direct result of the very aggressive hiring practices by Captain Torres and his team to fill those spots. And he's done a very good job. This is the first time in years that I can report to council that we are essentially at full staffing, sworn strength, during our budget presentation. However, we do have these 12 positions, which draws us down to 125. But if we look at our functional strength compared to where it was a year ago, we can see we've actually increased. So we have more officers on the beat and in the field today than we had a year ago. But we do have 12 officers who are out. 5 officers are in the academy, so obviously they're not showing up to do police work in the field. They're in the academy right now. And then we have 7 officers who are either injured on military leave or on some other form of leave. However, our fiscal year 12 budget that we're presenting now is once again a status quo of 137. But if we continue the practice of overhiring, because overhiring is how we got from 133 to 137. Periodically, we have to hire more police officers than we're authorized because we're forecasting future vacancies. So if we continue that practice of periodically overhiring, we could, from time to time, be as high as 141. Presently, I'm under permission to hire to 141. I've just spoken with Mr. Armstrong about sending 9 more officers to the academy in anticipation of future vacancies. So this all looks to be on a good trend. But if we can get our staffing up to 141, you can see what that will do with our functional strength, is we'll be up to 129, assuming we have this same reduction overall. So we're always around the 10 to 12 to 8 officers that are out on some sort of leave of some type or another. You're never at full staffing in terms of functional and operational being the same subset. You're always short some officers. But in order to make this paradigm work, you have to have the continued use of overhiring. And under the current fiscal year, we were granted a $200,000 appropriated reserve to cover any overages that we might encumber due to overhiring. And that pad has been very helpful. However, I don't think I'm actually going to need it for this fiscal year. I think we'll come in on target despite our aggressive overhiring practices, because sometimes you just get budget savings due to the vacancies. And those savings have been able to offset the additional cost of the overhire. But nevertheless, it's been very convenient to know that if we break the bank by overhiring, we had that $200,000 pad. We are going to have to forecast a yearly attrition rate of 5%, which is our historical average. So we'll use our overhire to address the attrition. And then if we fail to stay at current levels, then you start vacating some of these positions which are already vacated. Because, for example, the 4 officers that are in field training right now, we can't push them into a black and white to start reconstituting these positions in here. So as we fall below the 137 level, you start encumbering vacancies in other work assignments, specialty work assignments throughout the department. Right now I'm going to turn things over to Captain Altavilla. He's our patrol commander, and he's going to talk about P3 and divisional highlights for the patrol division.
Madam Mayor, member of council, good evening. Alex Altavilla, the patrol captain. I'm going to talk real briefly about the 3 main components of the patrol division. Our 911 Emergency Combined Communications Center, our patrol teams, and our patrol specialty teams. From a customer service perspective, I like to look at the patrol division from a resident standpoint, from a customer standpoint, kind of looking from the outside in. The communications center is the first point of contact for anyone that's requesting police, fire, or medic services. On average, the communications center receives about 40,000 911 calls a year and about 150,000 calls on 7-digit lines. Currently, the Combined Communications Center has a P3 target of answering 911 calls for service in 4 seconds. I'm happy to report that as of the end of this fiscal year, it appears that we're going to come in at 3.5 seconds. The other thing that we have that we will be implementing in the Combined Communications Center is a new 911 phone system and mapping upgrade, which comes in at a cost of about $300,000, which is completely funded by the state. The patrol teams right now are on target to come in for their P3 goals of responding to priority 1 calls for service, which is the ones that we take extremely seriously. However, it appears based on my projections that the priority 2 and priority 3 calls for service response times are going to come in under our P3 targets. We are implementing a new program that the Deputy Chief will talk about in a few minutes regarding CopLogic, which is our online reporting. That, along with more officers graduating from the academy next fiscal year, we hope to go ahead and bring down those response times on priority 2 and priority 3 calls for service. We talk about community partnerships, and every chance I get, I'd like to go ahead and throw a challenge out to the community to go ahead and assist us in our mission. And community participation really assists us, and it's extremely important. And we'd like the community to go ahead and, if they need police services, to call 911, to go ahead and be a good witness, sign a complaint if necessary, and also, quite frankly, be patient with response times, because we prioritize things on a citywide basis. And if they have any concerns at all at that particular point in time, I encourage them to go ahead and call the watch commander and resolve those. A couple of things in regards to our patrol specialty teams I'd like to talk about. One is our gang suppression team. We currently deploy our gang suppression team, which is 1 sergeant and 4 officers 7 days a week. They are currently working with the Detectives Youth Services section and working closely with the schools regarding gang issues. The chief spoke briefly about our criminal impact team, who continues to go ahead and hunt for those career criminals. And to give you just a small example of their productivity last year, they went out and performed 386 searches, 550 attempts to locate wanted subjects, 201 felony arrests, and 280 misdemeanor arrests. Our tactical patrol force, who handles the homeless-related nuisance crimes, and also the restorative policing component. This Saturday, I will be adding a new officer to that unit. It will consist then of 1 sergeant and 5 officers, and they continue to go ahead and work closely with community groups, nonprofits, CHP, Caltrans, and Public Works, specifically on homeless-related suppression, camp cleanups, and reuniting efforts with the homeless community. I'd like to go ahead and take the opportunity to go ahead and introduce Captain Armando Martel, who will speak about the investigative division.
Mayor and Council, Armando Martel, Captain of the Investigative Division. I'm the counterpart of the Patrol Division. The Patrol has a mission to help support the community by initially investigating the crimes, where the Investigative Division carries the ball and then follows through with the investigations. And we do it through a variety of means. I know that the Chief talked about the work units in the Investigative Division, but I'd like to expand a little bit about them. I have 4 investigative units. Each one has a supervisor. The first one is the crimes against persons. There's 6 detectives and 1 sergeant. They handle the violent crimes, the major crimes. This unit consists of 4 detectives that handle those type of crimes, and they work caseloads. There's also a detective assigned the cold case unit. The chief had mentioned there's 20 to 24 cases. That's his assignment. We also have the polygrapher who does the polygraphs for our administrative side when people are coming through the process to become police officers or members of the police department. But the cold case detective and the polygrapher also carry cases, because that is a very busy unit when we're talking about crimes that occur to people. So I'm real happy to say that in regards to all the cases that we work, our primary focus is the crimes against persons. The other unit is the crimes against property. That has 4 detectives and a sergeant. They're very creative. There's a lot of technical devices out there. There's got to be a lot of movement in regards to these units to be out there, be effective, to return the crime, the property, and make the arrests on the crimes against property. They handle the auto theft. They handle burglaries, embezzlements, and forgeries. These are 4 detectives that are quite busy. Youth Services, that's our gang unit. I have a sergeant and 3 detectives that are handling gang crimes, and 1 officer that's also assigned as a school resource officer. That officer happens to be on a medical, but that unit also continues to make their presence known in the schools, to continue the enforcement and securing our schools to make sure that no crimes occur there. The narcotics section has 1 sergeant and 5 narcotic officers. 1 is temporarily assigned to the Narcotics Task Force. It's a county-wide unit that handles more of the major narcotic investigations in the county. The other 4 detectives are assigned to narcotic and vice-type cases. Now, our workflow. Our workflow is split between reactive, which is the caseloads, and also very proactive, which is handling the proactivities such as like Gator Roll, cases like that, doing the gang injunction. Those are very proactive type of casework and investigations that our Bureau does. They handle follow-ups. They handle follow-ups from the patrol end. They also handle follow-ups from the district attorney's office. So we get workflow from both sides. Case highlights. Our persons unit has been very busy this past year and probably will be very busy this upcoming fiscal year with the homicides. We're very fortunate to have such experienced investigators that were successful with the Karachuri homicide, which we had to do twice, the Musser homicide, and currently we've done the Lyons trial twice, and we're going to do it a 3rd time. So that unit is extremely busy. The property unit, again, they've come up with different strategies. They've got the Catch a Thief program. I think some of you have seen it through the email process. That has been very successful. We've been able to identify, suspects through that by your help, by people in our email groups that identify them. They also use other technologies like getting involved in the different type of websites that are out there and trying to recoup some of our stolen property and identify other suspects. Our YSS unit, which is our gang unit, which is our investigators that really support our field units that deal with gangs, has been real busy this past year. They've been handling the gang injunction. They are the ones that did the research and are assisting in the processing the gang injunction through the courts. We're also dabbling with the graffiti issues that have come to plague our city. We've got a new anti-graffiti tracking system that we've been working with, and with that we've been able to put cases together by tracking the type of graffiti that occurs in our city. And lastly, the narcotic unit. That's the sergeant with 5 detectives. They've been extremely busy with the medical marijuana dispensaries. They're very complicated and extensive cases that require a lot of resources through serious investigations and then working their ways through the court system. So as you can see, the investigative division has been quite busy this past year and probably will be with the next fiscal year. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Deputy Chief.
Unfortunately, Captain Torres, the commander of the Administrative Services Division, couldn't be here today, so I'm going to run through this chart real quick. I've already talked about our aggressive hiring practices. He's hired 20 officers in the last 2 years, not all of whom have made it through the process, but 20 officers in 2 years is quite a lot. Our Information Technology Center has really done some astonishing things over the last year. And I just want to brag about them for just a moment, is we've recently gone online with a program called CopLogic. CopLogic is the way computer systems always should have worked in police systems, that allows our computer database and records management system to interface and talk to other computer databases in other police departments. So we're able to query, for example, the Sheriff's Department's records and database internally from the police department, which is something we've never had access to do. One of the frustrations in law enforcement in the United States in general is the lack of centralized computer databases and technologies. And we're basically as good as our own little database allows us to be. If we want information from the Sheriff's Department previously, we would have to go out there and actually access their database from their computers, and it wasn't very efficient. Well, CopLogic allows us to interface not only with the Sheriff's Department, but with all the police departments within the county of Santa Barbara, and now the Ventura County is also online with this program. So it is a very powerful tool to just broaden our level of information. CopLink is a system for online reporting. So when a person needs to file a report, for example, an insurance document, and they don't need a full-blown investigation to report a stolen bicycle, that they have absolutely no suspect information, they can do so online, or they can request a police officer. But many times people don't want to wait for a police officer. They want to fill out the report, and they can now do so online. And we're hoping that this will address some of our call for service workflow and volume. But that is a new technology which we're just coming online with now, but we're also very excited about that. Our DARE program, as we've, I think, previously mentioned, is currently suspended. Now, it may seem a little counterintuitive. Why, if our functional strength is increased by 4 officers, have we suspended DARE? And DARE is a program that you need to be all the way in or all the way out, because you can't run a DARE program and halfway through the semester tell the schools that, oh, by the way, we're not going to do DARE anymore. You either have to completely run through the whole program and end it at the end of the semester or end of the year, or be all the way in or all the way out. Well, several months ago, our DARE officer retired, and we were at a time of significant shortages. And these were caused by those 12 vacancies that we've seen, and some of our new hires had yet to come on and fill those vacancies. So we made the decision at that time to leave DARE vacant until our overall staffing levels, which are our true priorities. Our call for service workload and our investigative missions are our true priorities, and we have left this more administrative function vacant until we're able to fill it in the future. This is also true with the PAL officer, although this has been assigned to the patrol team to handle our call for service workload. It's currently vacant. We did, however, we're able to create an Explorer post over the last year. We currently have approximately 20 Explorers. These are young people who have an interest in law enforcement. Frequently, they're high school or junior high school students, and it's very, very positive. They assist us with perhaps traffic control, or they'll man barricades, or they'll wash police cars. They'll just do a variety of things. And mostly they enjoy the interaction with the police department, and they also get to go on Explorer competitions throughout the state of California. So we're very happy to have this, and in fact, some of our police officers working today started with us as Explorers. So it's also a valuable recruitment tool, 10 years down the road. Our dispatch training center transfer, we've already discussed that. However, I do want to talk about the training coordinator and supervisors in our dispatch unit. I think many of you know that chronically, year over year, we're short-staffed in our dispatch center, where we are authorized to hire 18, and presently we have hired 12 dispatchers. And the reason is there is a significant turnover in new hires because it's such a difficult job to learn and to become proficient. So in order to increase our rates of retention, we have half-funded a training coordinator position, which is currently filled by a retired dispatch supervisor. And her mission is to provide a greater level of training and support for the new hires, so we increase our rate of retention. This is something that we've seen has been successful with other police departments. We've had this person hired back now for about 2 months. They are reworking the training manual right now to make it as comprehensive and as up-to-date as possible. And we do think that the bringing back of this person as a training coordinator will help with our retention. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some considerations which are currently not represented in the budget. First is this first bullet point up here, the possible loss of the COP SLEEF funding. We get $100,000 a year from the state of California. As you know, the state's going through some major budget challenges. They have put this on the chopping block. We're not sure if it's going to be cut or not. But if the state ultimately pulls that money, we did budget for this $100,000 in fiscal year 12, the proposed budget. And if we lose that funding from the state, we will then immediately be $100,000 out of balance. So we'll have to either adjust our staffing levels to accommodate or adjust our target, but that would impact us. Likewise, the booking fees reimbursement. The state of California is currently paying for the Sheriff's Department's booking fees that he would normally charge us. This is to the tune of approximately $250,000. This likewise is on the chopping block with the state of California. We don't know if it's going to be pulled or not, but it's something we should be aware of.
I will mention that is in the governor's budget that he released today. The booking fees stays in there.
Which way did you say it went? It was going to go or it's going to stay?
It is included in the May revised.
It is included?
It is included, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so scratch that bullet point. We won't discuss that one anymore. Okay, there you go. Civilianizing 2 police officer positions. This is an idea, and coincidentally, it either means $140,000, $144,000 savings, or an additional expense of $144,000, depending upon how you want to look at it. And I'll explain both scenarios. We have 2 police officer positions that have a significant amount of administrative work. They are not field officers by nature. One is the training officer. His job is to work with the state of California and to make sure that we are staying in compliance with POST, Peace Officer Standards and Training. And he has a variety of other assignments. He may do some background investigation. He may assist the training sergeant with the recruitment process. However, it doesn't have to be done by a sworn person. It could be done by a non-sworn at a lesser rate of pay. Likewise, we have a special events coordinator. This person's job is to approve plans when people submit permits to hold parties, to hold block parties. They'll have a significant responsibility in the planning for fiesta. They are supervised by a sergeant, and likewise, it does not have to be done by a sworn personnel. However, we have filled these traditionally, or always, with sworn personnel because we like that level of expertise to be seated in those positions. However, if we were to fund those with non-sworn, and we were to move those officers into field units, you would get what would be the effect of a net increase of 2 officers for the expenditure of $144,000. You would get a likewise essential bump of about $320,000 worth of police officers for only 144. The other paradigm is you could eliminate those police officer positions, and then you would get a true savings of about $143,000. So if you wanted to eliminate those, it would have no effect on the field strength on the day-to-day operations, but you would lose them during specialty deployments for Fiesta and 4th of July, as well as you would lose them in not having that expertise in those assignments. But that is an option you may wish to consider. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about a new idea of enhancing our restorative policing efforts through RDA funding. And this is to the tune of $352,000. So what is that proposal, the restorative policing enhancement? We would hire an additional police officer. So we would increase our staffing, our authorized strength, from 137 to 138. We would likewise hire 6 community services officers. Some of you may remember the old host program that we used to fund through the police department. This is a similar type idea where these people would walk primarily State Street and Milpas corridors, looking to find low-level problems that he could either handle himself or call in a call for service to the dispatch unit to have a police officer. They're basically to be the eyes and ears of the police department in the field, and then to also make contact at low levels with people who might be perhaps not breaking the law, but are otherwise presenting a nuisance. Sometimes it's not against the law to be a nuisance, but it's nevertheless a nuisance. And these people's job would be to address those type of problems. So we would hire 6. They would be part-time positions, and those 6 part-time positions would be approximately $86,000. We would likewise hire 3 outreach workers. Now, their assignment would be to work directly for the restorative policing officer, to try and be a little bit of a force multiplier for that officer, and to try and outreach to the homeless and try to get them into and be more receptive to accepting the services that are currently available to the homeless population. So they're going to try and get them into housing. They're going to try either permanent or temporary, or get them the mental health services that they need. For example, they may drive somebody down to a hospital in Los Angeles that has room at a mental health facility down there. Things of that nature our current restorative police officer is presently doing. It doesn't necessarily require a sworn police officer to do that, and this would be a bit of a force multiplier for that officer. So this is just a recap of the expenditures. We're looking at $340 in labor costs. There are additional startup costs that we should discuss. One is we would need a new vehicle. So Motor Pool has suggested approximately $35,000 to procure a vehicle and to include all the add-ons, the radios, the lights and sirens, things of that nature to make it a functional vehicle. There's also yearly vehicle maintenance of approximately $2,500. There's fuel for the vehicle. Reunification costs. This is a very interesting cost that we've been spending. Frequently, we find homeless people in Santa Barbara who actually rather be somewhere else with their families. It's just they have no way to get in touch with their families, and perhaps they haven't seen their families in years. And the restorative police officer has discovered that through a lot of work. He has developed a layer of trust with many of these homeless who are now willing to tell him that, you know what I'd really like to do is return to Michigan or return to San Francisco and see my family up there and be with my family. He will then try to find those families and to say, hey, look, this person wants to come to you, but he doesn't have the resources. If you would like him, we would be willing to pay for a train or bus fare to help reunify the family. And many times the answer is yes. And we're able to do that, and we've budgeted for that into this program, a yearly cost of approximately $5,000. And then these are some other just low-level operating costs, cell phones for our staff.
Go ahead, sorry.
That's all right. A small uniform, and then training. We would send these people to the crisis intervention training and get them up to speed in their awesome training costs. Are there any questions?
Yeah, quick question on the reunification. Aren't there private organizations that do this now?
There could be. Officer Hove works well with the private organizations. I'm not exactly sure who's funding what. If we can get a private organization to cover that cost, that's great. But I would hate to have this opportunity to really reunify a family and somehow not do it because there's not a relatively small amount of money to just act on it now.
I think Santa Monica had like a 75% success rate in 31 days on the people that they got into that category. It's pretty impressive.
Yes. And just to recap, the total project cost would be $352,000, which would be covered by RDA funding. It is? Uh-oh. Let's
60.
Let's go past that slide real quick. That does end our presentation. If you have any questions.
Can I want to, can you put up the circles that show the functional strength and the operative strength? That one, yeah. So you kept saying status quo budget, but looking at if we want to compare to the last 2 years based on actual numbers, in the last 2 years with the status quo budget between this year and what you're proposing next year, we're seeing 8 additional boots on the ground, basically, from 2 years ago. By overhiring, which I'm sure we're all going to say, yes, do that. We've been saying that. But really, you're looking at, with the restorative policing addition, an additional officer. So you have plus 8 here, and then you have another plus 1. So that would be really for a total of 9
That's
additional
correct.
officers, right? And then there's the issue about civilianizing 2 others for a cost of $144,000. So that could get you to plus 10 from 2 years ago. Question, and then on top of that, the outreach and host, but those are not sworn, so I'm just going to talk sworn. One question on dispatch. You mentioned you're authorized for 18 and have 12. Are any of those 12 actual sworn officers right now?
No, that
No,
would be our
okay.
dispatch strength. We do have 2 officers who are currently on a medical leave in dispatch. We have no able-bodied officers right now in dispatch, which is good. From time to time, we've had to staff that with sworn, able-bodied sworn. But right now, we're not there.
So with the additional training component, you're hoping to get enough dispatch staff who are non-sworn to actually stay, and so you don't have to be in the situation of bringing a sworn officer into dispatch. Is that correct?
I can assure you it's a significant
Okay.
priority.
Okay. All right, so just to get those numbers. So if we have the plus 8 here, the plus 1 with the RDA money for restorative policing, if we want to look at another 2 by those 2 positions and have civilians do that, moving the 2 sworn officers over, that adds to 11 additional sworn from 2 years ago, plus 9 other individuals working on the restorative policing piece of it, the 3 outreach and the 6 hosts. So total 20 new bodies, some of 11 which is sworn and 9 which is either outreach or host.
Yes.
Okay.
We need to understand, though, that this is all based on a paradigm of hiring over our 137 allotment
Correct.
from time to time.
Correct. No, that's understood. Okay. Thank you. Questions, and then we have quite a bit of public comment. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question for Deputy Chief Mannix. I was trying to true up between the slides presentation and what was in the budget book, and I was looking specifically at the chief's staff level of sworn personnel distribution, and as I look at it's page 225 in the budget book, but the authorized positions there are different than what I'm seeing from slide 23 on our presentation that you gave. Am I looking at the right data here?
No, you are correct, and there's a reason for that. As you prepare your budget document, there are certain deadlines that occur, and you submit your budget. However, you don't run your police department based upon the way a book that was printed at a moment of time. You continually flex your resources and move them around so you can get the greatest good. And sometimes those good ideas don't always coincide with when a deadline occurred. So we've had some meetings over the last 6 weeks or so, and the chief has decided that it would be in the best interest of the department to make these changes. So they've just occurred since the submittal of the printing of this book.
So the expenditure part would be off then as well?
It is for that program, but not for the department. We tend to look at the expenditures from my perspective on a departmental level and not such a program analysis, but you are correct. The program would be adjusted, but not for the department.
Okay, and you wouldn't have those numbers by any chance?
I'm sorry, what?
The individual, like if I was trying to true up my report in the budget book to find out what expenditures were assigned to that particular, like the chief staff department.
I can forward those to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move to public comment. We'll 2 minutes up on the podium right here. If you're next to speak, if you could come close to the podium just so we can keep things moving, that would be great. We're going to start with Rick Feldman and be followed by Dave Hopkins. Good evening.
Good evening and greetings to you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I believe at this point in the process, you've heard sufficient anecdotal evidence of what I call a spike in crime. And you can do funny things with statistics. We saw a chart earlier that showed a decline in crime. And I think that you can argue that what we're really witnessing is a toxic increase in crime at the same time with a decline in personnel that are able to deal with it. So while we're all quibbling and talking intelligently over budgetary concerns and priorities, there's been a steady decline over a period of 10 years in the number of sworn officers and police available to answer any calls for service. And this didn't happen overnight. My understanding is that we currently contemplate having somewhere between 133 and 140 sworn officers on the force. That's if these increases and overhiring issues are carried out. That number creates a ratio of police to population that is way below the national average that you can find on the net anywhere, which is 1.5 officers to 1,000 population. And do the math. We figure the population of the city plus transients, people coming into the city, we're at a ratio of about 1 sworn officer per 1,000 population. And that is just not adequate. Chief Sanchez used the example of perception being reality. If it's the truck that's abandoned behind your place of business, then your perception is that there's an increase in crime that we're not dealing with. And so I would say to you that perception is reality, and that there are a lot of people sitting in this room.
Wind up, please.
Pardon?
I said you're at 2 minutes. Could you wind up, please?
I'm at 2 minutes already?
Yep.
Incredible. Okay, well, then I'll wrap it up by saying that we're of the belief at the Community Association that we're way under-policed and need to approve of an immediate increase because it takes at least a year to ramp up to the numbers that are authorized. Thank you.
Dave Hopkins will be followed by Tony Vasallo.
Mayor,
Good evening.
Mayor and Council and Chief. I just want to talk about the outreach workers for the restorative policing and whatnot. And as far as the funding for that, you could probably get that by the tickets that you issue for sleeping, because every time you say it's $77 a day for a person in jail. And so you have the open containers and the sleeping, so that you have the alcoholism, and you have outreach workers that work and show them that they can get help with their addictions. And 4.5 years ago, I was in my addictions, and if it wasn't for an outreach worker, I probably wouldn't be here today because of the drugs and alcohol. The police over and over would give me citations, which is understandable, but it works out where it was 500 open containers, which was $20,000. And if you give that to each individual that's out there, instead of giving them a chance at life and going to a drug and alcohol program, and letting them sleep at night, the funding would be there to help them out instead of putting them in jail. And, the outreach workers are very much needed in the community. And it's not the, Milpas Street says, it's such a hassle. Well, what's in the best interest for the human being that's out there? Not what's in the best interest for my business. Let's help the person that has the problem. And, the money's right there. Just don't put them in jail. Just help them. Thank you.
Tony Fasalo will be followed by Jason McCarthy.
Madam Mayor and City Council members, I'd like to yield my 2 minutes to Rick Feldman so he can finish his comments, if that's all right with the Mayor.
That's fine.
Council.
I'll even give you your full 2 minutes.
I've been very impressed with the Milpas Association.
But now you're using up your 2 minutes. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Mr. Feldman.
Learning about passage of time here. I think it's really important to come back to that ratio of police to population. And I want the council to recognize that statistics can tell you different things. And I'm not arguing with the statistics that are reported. I'm just saying that our perception in the Milpas Community Association, and also as has been reported in the press with a poll that came out recently, is that the perception of the people in this town is that crime is on the rise, that it is not abated at all, and that we're looking down the barrel of fewer sworn officers than we had, many fewer than we had 10 years ago, and a lot more crime. So if this city council does have the wisdom and the courage to vote a budget that allows for more sworn officers, there's an additional problem. That is the time lag of up to a year that takes place between the time that such an increase is approved and the time when these new sworn officers may be available for street duty. And we all know that the problem exists and has to be dealt with right now. So we must face the fact that even a unanimous vote to approve an increase in sworn officers would be dealing with a Pyrrhic victory, because the situation on the ground won't change for a very significant period of time. Just be about 10 more seconds, okay?
Got 37.
I'm told that some approved overtime might provide a Band-Aid, but that would inevitably lead to a burnout of existing officers. So what's next? Very unfortunately, we have to live with the fact that previous councils have left us in a position where we do not have enough of a police force to provide us with the degree of public safety that we want and that we all deserve. That, ladies and gentlemen, is more than unfortunate. In a word, it's unforgivable. So thank you for giving me time.
You're welcome. Jason McCarthy will be followed by Tony Romasanta.
There's a lot of speakers, so I'll keep it brief. I'm the immediate past president of the Greater Santa Barbara Lodging and Restaurant Association, and tonight I represent the board of directors in supporting the restorative policing enhancements. We feel that it's crucial that our city is clean and safe, not just for the benefit of visitors, but for residents as well. We are called the American Riviera, and that reality of Santa Barbara should match the perception of Santa Barbara. Budget issues are difficult, but this is an area where the price of inaction or status quo will be much higher. The Lodging and Restaurant Association urges you to work together to make this funding happen for the betterment of our community. Thank you.
Tony Romasanta will be followed by Holly Walters.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm here speaking on behalf of the board of the Hotel Restaurant Association as well. Our motto, our mantra is a safer town and an environmentally clean town. We cannot grow the pie to bring you the revenue unless you do your job. Your job tonight is to indicate your goal is the same as ours. We think you need 150 sworn officers. That's what you had 10 years ago. Most of our employees are Hispanics. We have a very large percentage of Hispanics living in this community. I think the number is about 38%. Most of our employees and their families are renters. That number is 57%. Those people deserve a safer, a cleaner community. So we're going to be pushing for that. And incidentally, you have the money. I noticed that in FY 210, according to your documents, citywide revenue was $284,406,245. So let's not have any nonsense. You don't have the money. You got the money. It's a question of how you spend it. Every family goes to a store and decides how they're going to spend their money. We think the number one priority in this community is safety for everybody living here. Chief Sanchez has said clearly he needs more people to be proactive.
You need to
How
wind up,
can you?
please.
Let me finish up. How can you drop the PAL program? How can you drop the proactive programs? Don't do it. Go for 150 officers. That's what you need. That's what we want. That's what we all deserve.
Thank you, Mr. Ramasanto.
Thank you.
Holly Walters will be followed. If you could. You can please.
Well, that was a tough act to follow. Mayor Helene and City Council, my name is
Hold
Holly
on just
Walters.
a second, Holly. Reverend Doug Miller will be next. Just want to make sure. Okay. Go right ahead.
I am a member of the NAC. However, today I'm speaking on my own behalf as a person heavily involved in Santa Barbara's tourism industry and as a person whose home was burglarized last year. Here's an email I received from a tourist who stayed in my West Beach vacation rental this past Saturday. Hi, Holly. Really enjoying the apartment and having a great time. The only thing I wanted to mention is that across the creek is what appears to be a homeless man in a car. He's been there all day staring into our windows and now seems to be starting to drink. It's a little uncomfortable knowing this guy might be around drunk tonight. It's made hanging out on the patio or having the windows open today uncomfortable. Thought you should be aware. Well, I observed the same guy, and to me it appeared as though he was dealing drugs, so I called the police. Perhaps it was a low priority, but the cops never showed up. This was just this past Saturday. And last week I worked for a destination management company as a guide on the dinner shuttle, bringing 350 people from the one hotel to downtown and back to the hotel. A group of tourists told me about their experience at the Pierre Lafon restaurant on State Street. They didn't talk about how tasty the food was or the great service. All they could talk about was that they were harassed by a man who was evidently homeless and obviously intoxicated. They said he reminded him of one of the zombies from Michael Jackson's Thriller video. He leaned over the railing and attempted to grab food off their plates. Because he wouldn't leave them alone, they asked to be moved to an indoor table to finish their meal. Never once did they see a cop. They said it was unacceptable. One lady went so far as to describe the incident as one that left her traumatized. She made it a point to tell me that she will never come back to Santa Barbara. These 4 people were from a group of 350 just a week ago. They said that they couldn't wait to tell all their colleagues about this experience. Imagine what all the other tourists witnessed or experienced. Santa Barbara's tourism industry cannot afford to allow this awful behavior to give us a bad reputation. We need more cops. We need proactive policing, not just reactive policing.
You wind up, please.
The way to accomplish this is to hire more police and have more consistent police presence, especially State, Milpas, and the waterfront. Thank you.
Reverend Douglas Miller will be followed by Eric Beecher.
Madam Chairperson and councilpersons, I represent the Santa Barbara Clergy Association and the Interfaith Initiative here in Santa Barbara. First of all, we want to thank the police department for the tremendous job you've done with the limited amount of resources, and we especially appreciate the fact that you're looking into causes and solutions. We feel that's the way to do good policing. And we're very supportive of the restorative police situation and restorative justice. And we hope that this will be a very successful program. We support it. We'd like to see not people out there telling people where to go home, but helping deal with solutions and problems. People out there are not transients. They are human beings. People, brothers and sisters, neighbors who are going through hard times. And I think we should frame the issue that way so that we see that our responsibility is to be a family and that we treat people as family and not demean them and dehumanize them by this language. We would not support increasing quantity of police officers, but rather the quality, which is what I've heard today is happening, and we're very, very supportive of that. We're not a police state. I was in China a couple years ago, and they have police persons at every corner, even in the hallways of our hotels. But we're not a police state. We like to see other kinds of solutions. There was a study done in LA about gang violence. 67% of the students in LA have hopelessness and alienation, which a clinical psychologist called depression. And that's why we have gangs today, because people feel hopeless, alienated, and without opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Beecher, and I know Mike McGrew and Greg Hans are giving you time, so you'll have 6 minutes, and then Sharon Byrne will be after you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity, Madam Mayor, distinguished council members. Thank you very much. Just taking notes during this presentation, so I'm having to kind of go off of that because there were some things that came up that I didn't know or wasn't aware of. So I'm going to try to address some of those issues that I think we have and hopefully make our point. Over the past decade, the police department has suffered unprecedented staff cuts, and we are currently at the lowest staffing levels that many officers have seen in their entire careers. Status quo staffing, which is the first time I've seen that term, isn't going to cut it as far as we can see. Our service to the citizens of Santa Barbara has been suffering as a result of these staffing cuts, and we are optimistic that if the City Council will reverse this trend and bring the department up to a staffing level that allows us to provide customer service and public safety the community pays for and deserves. I think the chief was trying to say that he wanted more police officers, but we're a little disappointed that there wasn't a little stronger message that more police officers are needed at this time. We recognize that the chief's request is a difficult one, asking for more at a time when many are being told to do more with less. We want to have a united front with the department leadership. We cannot remain silent any longer. The city administration continues to make cuts to our department. A one sworn officer and some civilian officers, if you want to call them officers, because they're civilians that really won't be able to enforce any laws, I don't believe is going to be the answer to this. In fact, I think it may even create more calls for service in the future when you have people out there actually having to call the police and tell them to come to help them when that time comes. The Santa Barbara Police Department needs additional staffing. Ideally, we would like to see 10 officers and 5 support staff added to our budget over the next 2-year cycle. I think it's going to be important that
we try to cooperate as much as we can with City Council and with our staff to make a difference in this problem. And I think it's going to take additional officers to do it. In fact, I know it is. And I'm hoping that City Council sees, and I know that the citizens see, that this is a priority. And so I'm hoping that City Council can take a look at this budget and make some changes to it that really make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sharon Byrne will be followed by B. Molina.
B had to go. Just giving you a heads up there.
Sorry?
B. Molina had to go.
Oh, okay. So then Bruce Giffen will be next. Thank you.
All right. Chief Sanchez asked, what level of service do you want? And here's the answer from the community. Better than status quo. We saw that through the police presentation that crime has dropped from 2009 to 2010, albeit small amounts, but Part 1 crime. What did the world look like in 2000 and 2001 when we were at full deployment of 150 officers? I keep looking at the charts that say overhiring, but if you started from 150 and you're coming back from sort of 130, you're not overhiring. You're catching up from where you used to be. What were the days like when we had the 6 beat officers that actually had those community relationships? When we weren't just doing responsive policing, but we were doing proactive policing. That is the thing the community is calling for. Everybody knows when you have a CHP officer sitting on the highway, speed drops, right? People stop speeding. The same thing applies to city streets. You have police presence on the streets, guess what? Crime drops. It's not about locking people up or arresting our way out of this or any of that. It's about stopping crime before it actually happens. The restorative policing offer looks good. You managed to find $356,000 in funding from the RDA. I don't know how you're going to pull that off, but it looks good. If you could find that, maybe you can find more. There's contention that there is funding in some of your other city funds. I would urge you to find that. The neighborhoods are asking you to find that. We are looking for better service than what we have today. We want a safe, strong, clean city. It's on you to make that happen. Thank you.
Bruce Giffen will be followed by, if we could, I appreciate you like what's being heard, but I would appreciate to stop clapping in case there are other opinions in the room, although wanting a safe city, I can understand everyone wants that, but you know where I'm going, right? Thanks. Bruce Giffen will be followed by Laura Rancietto.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm Bruce Giffen, and I'm a member of the Milpas Community Association. I'd like to take a moment and celebrate a small victory, and that's the Cabrillo ball field's been returned to the kids and the soccer teams who get to play catch in it today. And that came about because of a group of community citizens said enough is enough for taking back our town. And with help from the city, the police department, Parks and Rec, as well as others, we've got the momentum. And we need to keep that momentum. We can't just say, okay, we've got it back, and now let's put our attention on to State Street. And no, momentum needs to stay on Milpas Street and the waterfront and State Street. We really do need the beat cops. We need the beat coordinators. We need that restorative police that comes about through community police action. Again, this is the community that's asking for that. We want to see that happen. Santa Barbara is a tourist town, as we all know. It trades on its reputation. You know, my son, my 18-year-old, recently moved to Ventura. He's working down there on Main Street. You know what the people say to him down there? Well, you've got a lot of problems up in Santa Barbara. We can't really afford that. We have a lot of competition. You know, it's interesting that Santa Monica, a similar-sized town, has over 200 cops. How do they do that? It's not a police state. This is our community. We want it back. Thank you.
Laura Rancietto will be followed by Dorothy Littlejohn.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I grew up in Santa Barbara my whole life. Lived on State Street, grew up downtown. My parents owned a business since I was 16 downtown. And thanks to the police and our community, we have always felt safe in Santa Barbara. I feel that downtown and the Milpas area have improved over time and that we don't need any extra police officers. I don't lock my cars. I have a lot of friends that don't lock their doors, even when they're not home. And since I now have 2 small children, I would like the money to be spent on education, because it's proven that spending money on education and enrichment programs will cause crime and to go down and keep the community safer than having more police on the ground, when I don't really think that that is something that we need. So a lot of mothers like I can't afford to pay for expensive summer camps and all these extra things that we just can't afford to pay. So I think that the money would be better spent on more things for the kids. We really need that more than I think that we need police, just because I've always felt safe and I still feel safe, and I've lived here my whole life. So I also noticed that a lot of the people talking are representing businesses, and they may not be representing the actual community and the people who have children and families to raise in the city, and are just thinking about their businesses and making money and thinking with their pockets instead of thinking with their hearts and thinking about the families and us who have to deal with these problems when you politicize situations and you know, get the unions and the businesses and everybody else involved. Just remember to think about us, because we're the ones raising the future. Thank you.
Dorothy Littlejohn will be followed by Alba Vargas.
Hello, Madam Mayor and City Council. My remarks are similar to Laura's, so I'll keep mine short. My name is Dorothy Littlejohn, and I have lived on the east side for about 35 years or so. What I would like to see in my neighborhood is definitely not more police. I'm certainly in favor of the PAL program, the DARE program, and restorative justice component, which is a quality increase rather than a quantity increase. What we need is more organized activities for the children and teenagers in our neighborhood, such as after-school programs, enrichment programs, summer school with many choices of classes, jobs for teenagers, internships which will pay a small salary, community activities that include the whole family, like the recent cleanup that was happening. And my personal desire is a bilingual community garden club. So with these kinds of activities, the kids won't join gangs. There'll be less crime, but we mainly just need to keep our kids busy. Thank you.
Alba Vargas will be followed by Luis Hernandez.
My name's Alba Vargas, and I've lived on the east side my whole life since I was a little girl, and I've always
I'm going to move your mic right down there. There you go.
I've always felt safe. There's times where I've gone home at like 12 o'clock in the morning. I've walked in. I feel totally fine. I don't think that we need extra policing. What I do feel that we need is more after-school programs, more youth organizations, more programs also for homeless people. You know, more clinics, mental health clinics, more drug and alcohol abuse clinics. There's many children out there who would love to have someone to talk to, someone to just be like, hey, you know what? I can't talk to my parents, so I can talk to someone here at this organization. And I feel that you guys should spend more money on that than more policing. Thank you.
Luis Hernandez will be followed by Miguel Ramirez. Mr. Hernandez? Nope. Okay, Miguel Ramirez, be followed by Suzanne Reardon.
Good evening. My name is Miguel. I had lived in the east side for about 10 years. And I'm currently working with people in the community through the organization Importa. And one of the issues that they raise, or they mention, is that police is not the response to what is happening in the community. I think we should just keep the same amount of police that we have right now. Somebody mentioned it, that that money should be spent on programs. But if the city needs to put some money on paying police officers. They should just put it in preventing programs for the community. I think there's actually, I talked to a lot of people in the community. They think police is not the solution, and we need to find a balanced solution. I think the people that come here just probably is protecting their businesses. I'm talking for the people in the community. That's what they, especially Latino, are the ones that they would like to see more programs, after-school programs. That's my comment. Thank you.
Suzanne Reardon will be followed by Jeff Bard.
Good evening. I'm the director of a social service agency, a nonprofit agency called Families Act. And we were born from the critical lack of treatment for people with mental health disorders and co-occurring drug and alcohol problems. And this starts at a very young age. I would submit to you that public safety is going to require more treatment. We have a critical lack of treatment services in our county. And I would propose to you that as wonderful as community policing is, the community police officers' hands are tied by the lack of beds. I was fortunate enough to participate in a crisis intervention training with several members of the police department, and we all were on the same page about this. Where are the beds? We have a critical lack of beds. This is the responsibility of the county, and I realize this, and I would propose that we need to, the city and the county will have to coordinate and collaborate much more closely to make sure that our funds can go to provide treatment. Officer Hove is doing a wonderful job, but he's driving people down. He's reuniting people with their families. That work can be done by just about anybody. High school child could do that work. It's a wonderful thing. Let's get somebody doing that work. He's driving people down to treatment centers in L.A. because we have no beds in Santa Barbara. I spent several hours this weekend at Millennium House, a wonderful place in Northridge where there are a handful of people or more from Santa Barbara. For a price of $265,000 a year, they are serving 28 adult males for 1 year. They're providing that tender, loving care, that labor-intensive treatment for that price. And so look what you can get for $100,000. Look what you can get for $1 million. You can treat, more than 100 people for 1 year. This is what we need. Public safety requires treatment. And that's a direct quote from Judge Mary Gorman in San Francisco, who ran the behavior court for many years. Public safety requires treatment, not more cops. Thank you.
Jeff Bard will be followed by John Dixon.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. My name is Jeff Bard, and I founded the Crisis Housing Information Team per request of community activists about 10 years ago. And on that qualification, I was nominated for and voted in and seated on the SHAC, the advisory committee. And I heartily endorse what some of the folks from Pueblo and folks from the east side and folks from the west side have had to say about addressing the priority issues concerning youth. And I don't think anyone from the homeless advocacy community or the poor advocacy community ever thinks that it's okay for someone to walk up to a restaurant and reach over the rail and grab someone's food off a plate. I mean, we're not about that. And the characterization of such a profound issue in terms of things of that nature is really missing the mark entirely. We've got very serious criminal activity going on in Southern California. And you need to read the Los Angeles Times to know what's going on, because the local papers don't cover that stuff. That stuff is going to come our way if we fall asleep at the wheel. So let's not worry about, a guy who's had a couple drinks too many, for God's sake, and let's recognize that Cam Sanchez in this department, by and large, does an excellent job. Let's just look at the serious stuff with the youth, and let's address, and let's get a new ordinance if you bug people eating at a restaurant. No, we're not having a problem with that. You don't hear us clapping and disrupting like a bunch of kids at a basketball game. Okay? So we're the ones that are obeying the law tonight, and we're the ones that are compliant. Thank you.
John Dixon will be followed by Anja Brown Lawson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm John Dixon, owner of Tri-County Produce on Milpas Street. And before you are some tough budget decisions that must be made in regards to our public safety, as we're talking about. And as a business owner and taxpayer in the city for the past 26 years, I believe I've had the right to expect a safe environment to live and work in. Something of major concern is over the past decade, our city has apparently put public safety on a lower priority than in past years. We used to have, as we saw, 151 officers authorized in our budget, and now we have 137, and less than that actually employed right now. I know in just dealing with shoplifters as a merchant, response times have become much longer in past years than in the past years. Sometimes I've waited more than 2 hours for an officer to respond, or sometimes even 2.5 for just a shoplifter incident, and you have to hold the person in the back room. Also, calls for problems in the neighborhood with a drunk or out-of-control person can be quite lengthy as well. This is not just in the Milpas neighborhood, but even State Street and the waterfront has gotten out of control with transients, aggressive panhandlers, and other various problems, all bad for Santa Barbara. My sister grew up in Santa Barbara and has been gone for quite some time. When she and her family come to visit me, she is shocked as what has occurred in the downtown area and all the changes that occurred there, and she doesn't even like going down there anymore with her kids. With the increase in transit-related crimes alone, up over 400% in the Milpas area, misdemeanors and felonies, widely accepted cutting our police department and budget for officers. Fees on building permits, licenses, parking fines, etc. continue to rise, and yet service for public safety continues to decline. I ask why. We used to have beat coordinators, as we saw 6 of them, who responded to community outreach. Now we're down to 1 for the entire city. Why? We used to have an officer for the DARE and PAL programs for our youth, and now those have also been suspended. Why? When will this city stop cutting public safety? It's up to you, Mayor and Council members, to listen to your people. You are the governing body responsible for these choices. Please make the correct budget decision by putting public safety and welfare as the city's #1 priority, and please do it now, not at some future date. We all want and deserve a safe and clean town.
Can you wind up, please?
Don't settle for anything less. Give Chief Sanchez the budget he needs to bring back the necessary police officers we once had to keep us all safe. Thank you.
Anja Brown Lawson will be followed by Dave Lombardi, and the final speaker will be Mark Whitehurst.
Good evening.
Evening.
First of all, I want to say that I believe the police are doing an okay job in terms of keeping the community safe as it is, and I don't think we need an increase in $352,000 put back into the police budget. Recently, there was a survey that was done by Common Ground, which I'm sure you know about, and in that survey they looked at the most vulnerable people in terms of needing housing and those on the street homeless. And I think that it would be more prudent to put money into providing housing and treatment for people rather than more police. Our country puts more people in jail than any other country in the world, and that's, to me, appalling. We need to look at other solutions for people that are really vulnerable, that are sick, that have mental illness, that have housing issues. We all know what's gone on with the economy, and continually putting people in jail is a waste of resources and money. I think that if we put more money into, call it restorative justice, if we put money into providing more services for people, we would have, I think, less recidivism with the police department, continually picking up the same people and reincarcerating them. I believe that the DARE program should continue. I think it was a deterrent. Whenever I heard about the DARE program, which my children went through, and all of, probably most people here in the room that had young children 10, 15 years ago, whenever I hear reports, the reports were really positive. So I really think that that program needs to continue.
Can you wind up, please?
One person talked about community policing and police having more presence. That's not going to solve the problem. I think if they were in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dave Lombardi and then Mark Whitehurst.
Evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Dave Lombardi, and I'm the owner of Fast Frame and the chair of the safety committee for the downtown organization. We are very supportive of Chief Sanchez and the restorative policing program. However, we feel it's only one solution to this whole problem. We feel strongly that a police presence in the downtown corridor, Milpas, and the beachfront properties is a great deterrent to not the homeless, but the aggressive panhandling and vagrant situation of the thing. Without police presence, this situation will just become more enhanced. Kel Hove is doing a fantastic job in his restorative policing program, but he's only one man. We need those officers that Chief Sanchez is looking for and that all the other police officers are asking for. We need them to be beat officers with their feet on the streets, walking up and down State Street, walking up and down the Milpas corridor, and walking the beachfront. They can't be in black and whites. They need to be out there on the streets. Thank you very much.
Mark Whitehurst.
Mark Whitehurst, president of the downtown organization. Appreciate hearing from Dave. We'd like to say that the proposal that's on the table is aggressive. You are hearing what we're saying, and it's a move in the right direction, and we'd like to add our support to this budget proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes public comment. It's to the council. I'm going to start with just one question, just because I just put things in context. I think it was Ms. Byrne who asked what were crime rates back in 2000, 2001 when we had 150 officers budgeted. Do you have those numbers handy?
No, we don't.
Okay, it'd be good to see.
We can get them to you,
That'd be good information to get.
We can
Okay.
get them to you.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, to follow up on what Mrs. Burns' comment is I remember what it looked like when we had those folks and the beat officers and beat coordinators and the foot patrols on State Street. We certainly weren't dealing with this level of issue. I don't know if it's going to show up on a stat sheet or not, frankly. But what we are missing is a presence. And what I wanted to put forward is that when people are commenting about misplaced priorities or why don't we have more kid programs or other programs besides more cops, we've gotten away from what we need to do first, which is take care of the problem at hand. We're not talking about necessarily homegrown situations and kids that grew up here getting in trouble. Yeah, there's some of that. But our streets right now have a lot of folks that are just simply exhibiting bad behavior. Now, that behavior is not acceptable. And Mr. Hotchkiss and I talked about it at a meeting a couple of meetings ago. It's not the individuals we're trying to target, it's the behavior. It's that lack of civility. It's the kind of thing that we're not talking about trying to ticket or arrest or to somehow arrest our way out of this big problem. We're talking about putting presence on the street. The best presence we could have would be uniforms and badges. We're going to try to help out with the citizen patrol as well. But we can't have those programs. We can't fund those programs if transit occupancy tax, sales tax, and those kind of things diminish because we've let our town slide. This has to be a first priority. Yeah, the budget is tricky, and I think the administration has done as good a job as what tools we have. It's going to be up to my colleagues and myself to figure out where the dough is going to come from. But we have to do it. We don't really have a choice. This isn't an option anymore. We need to do this. We need to figure it out. We've made a small step, and it's a small Band-Aid to try to make things better, at least initially. But for us to have a chance at reestablishing the rest of those priorities, we have to do priority one first, and that is going to be to get us back up to what we feel is the level of service that we all deserve and we all expect in a town like Santa Barbara. We have to return to that. We were there. I was here when it was happening, and there's always been issues with transients or whatever label you want to put on them. But the amount of aggressive street crime that's happening right now is driving our main industry to the negative. If we don't take care of that, there's not going to be a whole lot to talk about. So our priority has to be that for us to get to the other priorities. Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd appreciate hearing at our big budget roundup how our police budget compares to our gross national product, to the general fund as a whole. To go back to the halcyon days and make that comparison. I think that would be one of the useful things for the community to understand, and I also would look forward to getting together with Mr. Roma-Santa and poking through the budget book and having that conversation, because clearly you, Tony, have a good handle on dollars and this community, and I look forward to that, to have that experience. Everybody wants those halcyon days. The things that have come across my screen in now the year and a half that I've been had the privilege of working for this city as a council person, I've learned that, for example, our retirement costs are going up. That's now not now, it always has been, but it is a major portion of that budget and that total, that relationship to our general fund. The retirement costs are going up. Is it? I'm going to say they're going up 10% this year or something like that. Mr. Armstrong, is that a ballpark figure?
The rate for public safety employees next year goes up approximately 5% of salary for the public safety, and I believe for the miscellaneous employees it's about 1% of salary.
And then that will continue to go up for the next 3 years, will it not?
Going up dramatically over the next 3 years. It's one of the huge challenges we have, not just this next year, but for the next 3-4 years.
And so I think that for all of us to have that information will be useful as we try and balance these books. Another one is that I've learned since being here this time is that that halcyon day, the 2001, it was just 2 years previous to that the retirement age of police dropped from 55 to 50. Am I correct? I'm seeing a shaking of a head. No.
It wasn't the retirement age that dropped, it was the benefit structure changed from 2% at 50 to 3% at 50. So the benefit
so the age
structure
stayed the
went
same,
up.
the percentage went up. Okay. So the percentage went up. Another comment that was made today by the public which was very useful, is the how does Santa Monica manage to have a staff of 200 police? I understand their sales tax is something like 10 or more than 10%, 10.25%. So they get what they pay for with that. I don't have the courage to be asking the voters to raise the sales tax to 10.25%. I think that we're more looking to make do with what we have. I certainly agree with Mr. Rouse's comments about we need to have a handle on our town, and we need to do it. And I think Mr. Chief Sanchez has been as creative as one can be in managing our resources. And I appreciate the program we've been talking about it sort of informally here and there, this hybrid non-safety approach. I think it's going to make measurable difference, and we'll have more boots on the ground at the minimal cost. So going forward, I think that one of the things that we want to see is what's the ratio of law enforcement costs to our general fund? Where do we find for 10 extra officers, that's $1.6 million. Where does that come from? We have cut our Parks and Recreation budget, which is one of the other big general fund optional, quote unquote optional areas. We're going to be mowing the lawns every other week now instead of once a week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The cutbacks in there are really starting to chew on what our city looks like. And that's another ingredient we get back to the juggling act of presenting, of hosting people to this city. And the parks are a critical piece of that. So there's certainly, and I'll just back up to the big bang that occurred in defunding so many things, our buildings and so forth. It's been a real benefit to many of us who own homes. But Proposition 13 now, some 25 plus years ago, 30 years ago, changed the way we fund things in this state, and it's now starving us in some of our big programs, and the results are coming out now in the wash a little bit. Obviously, I don't need to say to anybody else how we're seeing it also happening at the county, state, and federal level. We're getting hit in kind of a perfect storm here. So I look forward to hearing what others have to say about solutions here. I do think that staff has done an admirable job of squeezing as much as there is to squeeze out of the resources that we have available to us. Thank you.
Mr. House?
Thank you. I have a question for the city administrator. With the proposal that we're seeing today, with over about $300,000 additional costs going into this, then I think from status quo, or I want to be sure I understand that. Does this require us to be looking at Parks and Recreation or some other department to take funds from their proposed budget to be able to make this, or is that part of the contingency that we had discussed before for the overhiring, or how does that fit in?
The proposed budget that you have, and plus the restorative policing part. First, within the proposed budget, you already have money in appropriated reserves to cover overhiring for next year.
To that 141 level that we were talking about.
That's correct.
Okay.
The proposed the enhanced restorative policing, it is new money from the redevelopment agency, and there's a couple caveats we need to make on that. One, that's dependent upon redevelopment staying around next fiscal year. Sure. We're assuming that it will, and if the governor has proposed to be eliminated. There's a lot of legal issues, et cetera, related to that. The second is we will readily admit it's a little bit on the gray area of the use of redevelopment funds. We've looked at other agencies. We've consulted with the city attorney. We believe it's legal, and we don't expect it to be challenged. But our redevelopment law does not allow you to use redevelopment funds for ongoing normal city operations. That's why we're calling this enhanced restorative policing. We're limiting it to the area of the redevelopment project area, but it also then will allow free up some of existing resources that can be used, for example, further up on the Milpas corridor. So it's we tried to put something together that we felt would help us in the restorative policing area, also get more folks on the ground, albeit they're not sworn folks, create a larger presence there, and do it within existing redevelopment law and with a reasonable budget.
Sure, and then freeing up the two sworn positions at a fraction of their actual costs by civilianizing, if you will, those duties. And
that's currently not in the proposed budget, so that would take additional resources.
That would. Okay. Just to refresh some folks' memory, I think it's important during the Clinton administration when they had that grant to put the officers on the street in communities like ours all over the nation. It was really welcome and really appreciated. I think we tend to remember the past in more glowing term, or, it seems so much better than speaking from now. But we didn't have Casa Esperanza, and we didn't have places for people to go. We did have a revolving door at that time too for people that were on the street, and Lower State Street hadn't come into its it's real wonder now. It's much better than it ever had been back then. I mean, back in the 90s before it got fully done. It's now a much better place to be, and I think that we appreciated that, and then when it went away, and it left us hanging, and that's too bad. I know that when I got on council in 2006, we were down at pretty much one of the lowest levels that we'd ever been in terms of our functional strength. And the council then authorized overhiring and continued to do that even up to 140, but we didn't quite achieve that. We kept trying and trying and trying, but the council should be on record for having made that call year after year and getting to the point where we have gotten up to 137, even though we pulled it down by 3. We're up to 137 for what's been authorized, and overhiring above that has still been something the council has continued to ask for and authorize and provide funds for. So I just want to take a little bit of an exception to some folks' concern that the council has not been actively doing our part from a budgetary side to get things to where we know is an adequate level for our community. And I'm very glad to see where things are right now at 137. And but really we haven't seen the impact on the street yet, have we? In other words, there's still a number of those are in Academy, Chief.
We have several in the Academy. They'll be out in July, but they still have to go through further training. It takes a while.
Okay.
It takes a while to get them out there on their own to handle calls for service. Clearly, in the 90s, with that grant, it helped a lot of communities, including Santa Barbara. That was prior to me, but I inherited that 150. I don't know how stronger I can make my comment other than standing on the table and screaming that no chief in his right mind is not going to ask you for more people.
Of course.
And I need more people if the level of service is what we want it to be. So I'm not going to jump on the table. I think I've been honest with my boss. I've been honest with you and the community that the proactive things that we have to do are something that my officers want to do. They want to do proactive work. It saves them time at the end. It saves the entire organization. But I understand the constraints, and I understand that I'm not the only department in the city. But we want to be at a certain place. And that certain place is called full service, where we do proactive work and assist in a variety of ways to keep all of our residents safe and their families safe. That's our goal. That's our goal. But I think that, yeah, those are great times when we had those grants. Those grants are coming back again at a much smaller scale. We're currently looking at a grant to hire more officers that is non-matching, which helps. Lieutenant Whittam is currently working on that, and we're going to apply for that grant, as many other people will, for the millions of dollars. Back in the 90s, it was billions with a B. 2011, it's millions with an M. So times have changed all around the country, but we will continue those efforts with grant seeking and those types of things, and hopefully we'll get to that point. But no chief in his right mind is going to tell you he doesn't need any more people, quite honestly. With the more we have, the more we get to do for you.
But Chief, I want to acknowledge your staff and you in particular for your leadership here, and that you've been really working as hard as you can to accomplish it. And this year we've finally gotten to a place that we've all been wanting to get to, 8 more than we had 2 years ago. We're on the right track. I like your proposal. I think it's a good one. I think it has a tremendous amount of strength in it because it builds a kind of resilience we don't have in there right now. It uses resources more efficiently, I think, by adding this other kind of component to it, the community service officers, the outreach workers, the restorative officer in particular. These are things that are really welcome. We know that these things work. Officer Hove has done a remarkable job, and he's taken over and filled the shoes of the gentleman that came before him. And I have to say, I think you're on the right track with your proposal, and I am concerned, however, when I hear proposals that would take us significantly beyond that, because I am concerned that we need to maintain a balance with our proactive programs for youth and our community in some of our other departments. And I think that that balance is what we're going to have to get to here by the time this budget discussion is all over. But I like your proposal. I want to support it, and I think you're on the right track. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, the call has been almost universal, not just from you, and not 100% from the people here, but 100% or 99% from the people that I hear from, that it's hard to enjoy the city when you're not sure what you're going to find when you get there, whether it's Alice Keck Park or downtown or McDonald's on Milpas or the ball field. What could we, with what you're proposing, have a full-time daytime patrol team of 2 officers on the waterfront, on the State Street, and on Milpas?
Well, currently our tactical patrol force and regular patrol officers are taking care of business all over the city in those 3 areas. Could we do more with more? Of course we could. You know, I need you to know that right now in the morning hours when we're getting up, our night shift, our graveyard shift officers are going to the beach and taking care of business in the early morning, doing a wake-up call every single day. Our officers, we don't have a school resource officer. So my detectives are going out every day, every morning before school starts, and every night when school lets out to do that. We realize as a police department that the work needs to get done. This organization gets the work done. But there's still only 24 hours in a day, and there's only so much time to get to some of those calls. And quite frankly, sometimes we may not get to a call. That's the reality of it. The other reality is it's not that we don't want to. There's a group of dedicated folks who do that. We've been spreading around the work throughout the department. It's not just Keld Hove, although he's doing a great job. Many of my officers have attended crisis intervention training. More will attend next week. They also deal with that. The problem is that it's very Band-Aidish, if you will, when an officer who's chasing a radio with many calls to take the time to do what Keld does. So I think people are picking up the slack as best we can. And sometimes there are things we're just not going to get to, quite honestly, at this point. But we know what's important. We know that those priority 1 calls, those emergency calls for service are critical. We understand that the Milpas corridor, the State Street corridor, and the beachfront is extremely critical. So we are attempting to do the best we can with what we have today. Do we want to make it better? Of course we do. It makes it better for everyone if we do that. But it always comes down to resources and the level of service that we want to provide.
So let me reiterate. What would it take to have 2 full-time cops on the street, on State Street, down at the waterfront, and on Milpas during the day?
Well, we could make that happen, but we'd have currently today we would have to take from other places. I'm talking about additional. In other words, you've got actually a proposal for expansion here, but it's not entirely sworn. Obviously, it's very small sworn. Will this allow us to have some sort of presence on those 3 locations that I said all the time during the day? I can't promise all the time.
Okay. I'm just asking here. I just want to find out. You know, obviously I'm saying I support you. I want to know how much we need to support you. Do we need to go beyond, as Mr. Rouse has suggested? It's certainly the status quo doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And, you know, here's my answer. We need to be in those 3 places full-time. I realize that.
I agree.
We are not doing it now because we have other things that we have to do with the number of people that I have.
Right.
Until that changes, that will be the status quo. Not because we don't want to be there full-time. We certainly do. I've spoken to the DO. I've spoken to the Milpas group quite a while ago. Our presence there, uniform and badge, as you mentioned earlier, is critical to me.
Right.
It's where we want to be. And again, if we wanted to do it tomorrow, we could.
Well, I
but
don't-
we'd have to take from somewhere else to do that.
I don't want to get you in trouble with your boss, who's sitting 2 feet away, but I would like to know if you could come back and say, hey, so to do what at least one councilman has asked about, it would take an additional X dollars. If you could do that, it'd be great for me to hear that. And you don't have to do it right now.
Well, I've been in trouble with my boss before. And so far, I'm still here, but I will tell you that our goal is full service. And we have to prioritize and shift people around if we have to. But it makes it difficult. It makes it difficult because people are working hard and they're chasing the radio. And we need to do that. Well, our job one is when that call comes in to answer that call for service. It's not to say that we're not considering Milpas Group, the Milpas Corridor, or State Street not important. We certainly do believe it's important. And I realize that at times when we shuffle a call for service and don't get somewhere, it upsets people. And they have every right to be upset. But I think that obviously it's obvious that more resources allows you to do more with
And if you had 150, could you do what I described?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to talk first a little bit about some of the comments from members of the public, some of which I agree with concerning social services. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that there are mentally ill people on the street in this city, in this state, in other states who need help and who cannot take care of themselves and who are not getting the help they need. I agree with that 100%. That's a problem that we need to solve. It's a problem, unfortunately, we as a city by ourselves cannot solve. And I think what we have to remember is that it's a problem with a lot of different aspects to it. And no one is suggesting for a moment that one solution is going to fix all the problems. I think it's also good to keep in mind that, to my knowledge, there is no other city in this county that has the level of social services, both governmental and nonprofit. Nothing else even close. And yet in the recent volunteer Common Ground survey, according to their count, we have 4 times as many homeless people in Santa Barbara as there are in Santa Maria, a city that's larger than us. So I'll let you figure out what the cause and effect is. This is a status quo budget for the police department. And as long as I've been on council, I have been opposed not only to status quo budgets, but to what we've actually had, which is reduced budgets. Every year I've been here for the police department. We don't have to go back to the Clinton administration. This council is responsible for the budget. This council, for years and years and years, has gone along with a steady reduction in police department staffing. Now, I realize that police are expensive. I realize pension costs are going up every year. I get that. But the police department has an essential function. The first duty of government is public safety. And we must make that the priority. When people talk about we're overhiring, well, yeah, we're overhiring because we know there are going to be retirements. We know there are going to be people out on injury. We know there are going to be people out on various kinds of leave. So forget about overhiring. It's meaningless. Yes, we have to do it. It's a tactical necessity because we know that there are always going to be people on the force who, for one reason or another, can't report to duty. So, of course, we have to overhire. The only number that you need to look at when you talk about police department staff is authorized staff. That's it. Currently, our authorized sworn staff is 137 in this budget. 10 years ago, it was 150. To me, 137, well, 2 years ago, it was 140. That number, 137, is unacceptable. I will not support a budget that does not include an increase in authorized staff. Now, I'm glad to hear that Chief Sanchez is not going to turn cops away if we offer them, because that's what I intend to do. I'm not sure yet where we're going to find the money, but I really don't care where we find it this year. This year, I'm happy to use one-time money. I'm happy to use reserves. I'm happy to use whatever it takes, whatever we need to do to shuffle things around to make sure that we increase, at least begin the increase of the police department back to a strength where the people of this city and our visitors, who are such an important part of our economy, feel safe. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. I can't support a status quo budget. I will not vote for one. It will not happen. Now, it may take us 2 or 3 years to get to the strength that we should be. I realize that hiring police officers and training police officers to the standard that the city of Santa Barbara expects, I realize that that does not happen overnight. But we need to fundamentally shift the direction that this city has been going for too long. So my goal in this budget is to hire more police officers and to hire more civilian support staff that those officers need to be effective. That is the bottom line for me. That is what we need to do. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate the comments. I want to start by saying, obviously, there are a lot of people from the police department here, and just to acknowledge that you are here and to thank you for the work that you do every day for all of us. Obviously, it's the highest priority, as we're hearing. This is the most crowded budget session we've had and probably will be. We only have a couple more left, and for good reason why people are here. A few things. I want to, I think it was Mr. Feldman right at the beginning. I was doing some math up here when you were mentioning the numbers, what we should see in the city of Santa Barbara, 1.5 per thousand, 1.5 sworn officers per thousand. So we just got our census numbers, and it's about 88,000 plus. So if you want to, true up to 90,000, so that gives you 135 officers, and then think of the 30,000 or so more. Really, what I think, it's not just the people who live here, but it's also, we have tourists and others here on a regular basis, so even adding another 30,000 or something for the day, that would add another 5, which goes to 140. So, and then that's authorized strength, and I think that's, when I hear 1.5 numbers per thousand, it has to be what's in the budget. I can't imagine the comparative numbers goes to authorized operational functional strength. That's too confusing. But so if it's 140 and we're at 137, the numbers there say we're pretty close. But I can tell you from comments I'm hearing and from public comment today, and just by being on the council for this long a time, that that's still not acceptable. And people want to feel safe in Santa Barbara. They want not only to see that the crime statistics go down, which the numbers have shown through the presentation, but they also want to feel safe. I mean, it seems kind of like a no-brainer, but that's what people want, and that's what people should expect and should get from, especially from a city like the city of Santa Barbara. So the question is, how do we do that, especially in tough budget times when we're looking at cuts elsewhere and so forth. So I appreciate the creativity in looking around for the restorative policing enhancement. We have to make sure redevelopment agency funds do not get cut completely, or figure out a way to secure those funds if it is truly threatened. This project, the proposal is for 3 years, is that correct? And hopefully that by the end of the 3-year cycle, at least that portion of the program, should we want to keep it, we'll have some additional funds as the economy hopefully turns around to pay for it with general fund. Is that kind of the thought process?
That's the hope, assuming the economy goes around
we'll get
and we
to it in 3 years.
control other expenses.
Correct. So in terms of what I've heard, I think Mr. White called the Halcyon Days, and part of that included a host program, as I recall, and that was something I know the DOs talked about. A lot of different community members have talked about whatever happened to that host program. Let's bring that back. So I think that's really quite brilliant to do that. And then in addition, the 3 outreach personnel that would report directly to the restorative police officers makes a lot of sense. And it goes to, I think, the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago that Mr. Hotchkiss and Mr. Rouse pointed out, which was we're talking about behavior and just the presence of an authoritative figure. It doesn't have to have a badge and a gun, per se, but someone who has the authority to connect with them quickly, and their job is to make sure that that type of behavior is no longer tolerated or condoned for even a minute. That's what I think people are expecting in Santa Barbara and what we've been hearing. And to use the host program, the street outreach program, might be a good way to do it. Not a, complete solution, but I think a good start, in addition to adding an additional restorative police officer. So I look at that number, the functional strength in FY10 and that 121, and it's completely unacceptable. And I think we all know that. We say that. So the work that finally that we're getting to a point where 8 more boots on the ground between FY10 and FY12 is a big deal, and that's going to be additional presence. That's good. Plus the additional sworn officer for the restorative policing program, plus the 6 host personnel and the 3 outreach. Granted, not sworn, but I think will help with the presence of the area and dealing with behavioral concerns that we've been hearing. And I do want to look at the 2 positions to try to the 2 positions if we use civilian staff, the training officer and the special events officer, and at least try and see if civilian staff would work. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think the cost of $144,000 for basically 2 additional sworn officers on the beat is something that people want and something that I think we could afford. I would suggest, how do we afford it? Because I'm going to ask my colleagues, you want to see different numbers. I need to know show me the money, basically. Last week during the week before, during the Parks and Recreation budget, there was a significant line item, way more than $144,000, that had to do with playground replacement, capital improvement, using general fund money for that. Many of those playgrounds, I think it was said all of those playgrounds are within the RDA zone and would be eligible for RDA funding. So if we were to move and I asked at that time to look at that, that would free up, I think it was $250,000 or around there, maybe it was $200,000. So if that $200,000 was moved from general fund to RDA, which it's eligible to do for that particular capital project, that frees up the $144,000 in general fund money that can be used to hire those 2 civilian personnel, then shifting those sworn officers. So then we get from 121 up to 129 to 130 to really 132, and we're getting closer to where I think we need to be. To go beyond that, before I can say yes, I really need to see where exactly that extra money is going. And I appreciate Mr. Francisco's point of reserves or other things. The concern I would have with that is what happens 1 year from now. When pensions do go up, it's one-time money. The last thing I certainly want to be in a situation is looking at cuts a year from now because we used one-time money for something that's an ongoing expense. So that we'd have to figure that out. But I certainly, especially because we're looking at the next couple of years with PERS prices going up and so forth, that's going to be a big ticket item. So for me to say yes to that kind of one-time money for ongoing expenses, I got to be convinced that we're not going to be put ourselves into a tight corner a year from now or even 2 years from now. The only other, in terms of, we basically have 3 options if we want to increase the number of sworn. And I appreciate, thank you, Mr. Beecher, for giving me a specific. as opposed to saying we need more. I mean, what exactly? And you said 10 officers and 5 support staff over a 2-year period. So that's the goal if we were to go along that proposal. And it actually gets pretty close to what the chief was saying, or what the number of 150 is. In order for us to pay to do that, we have 3 options. We got to either cut elsewhere, use one-time money, but that might put us in danger a year from now, or find new revenue. And I'm not a proponent of raising taxes either, but if the community really wants this and really looks to Santa Monica and other places as a comparison, maybe we want to ask the voters, is this important enough for you to tell us that we're willing to pay for it in that way? I think we need to put our ship in tight order in order to even ask the voters for that. And I'm not saying that I'm all supportive of it. I'm just putting it out there as an option, and it's up to us to be able to put something on a ballot for the voters to approve. I would not suggest doing that. Well, I don't know. You have other things coming up in terms of police headquarters and things like that, and funding schemes, but not schemes, that's a bad word, options. But I think that we should at least put it on the table in order for us to decide whether or not to take it off the table, as opposed to never putting it on the table. Just a thought there. And then finally, I want to get back. Mr. Roma-Santa says we want to get to we want to be a safer city and an environmentally clean city. And so if we're looking at other funding and do look to other cuts in general fund departments, I would certainly be careful of cutting things like park maintenance even more, or beach cleaning even more, because of, we've heard from our tourism industry and the Restaurants and Lodging Association is that first image that you have of Santa Barbara, how clean the parks look, how pristine the beaches are, that whole area downtown and on State Street and in Alex Keck Park Memorial Gardens, if that doesn't have that first impression of wow, people are not going to come back, they're not going to stay longer, and then on top of that, we need to make sure people feel safe. So that, I think, I'd like to hear from my colleagues either today or soon, because I think staff is going to need to know if we want to add more money to the department budget, where is it coming from? And they need to hear some direction. But that would be so wrapping it up, my suggestion would be to go with the proposal, but also add the $144,000, and I explained how that could be funded in order to hire those 2 civilian officers, which basically gives us 2 new sworn positions. Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On that $200,000 for the playground equipment, is that one-time money, or was that just is that ongoing?
Well, it's the capital money that's currently budgeted for playground equipment. I think I would view it as one-time money.
Right. And let me respond to that, because I said be careful about one-time money. What we'd be doing is hiring 2 non-sworn officers, which cost long-term is much less than hiring other sworn officers for using one-time money. So it's not ideal, but I think in terms of getting to that point, it's better than let's just find another $600,000 to hire, 4 new sworn, that kind of thing.
Well, Madam Mayor, the point of my question is to say we're heading in that, we're taking a risk to be doing that, and I think it's one that I think it's a strategic risk. It's saying, okay, this is something that is one that's going to put, and it isn't 8 more boots on the ground, 16 boots on the ground, unless you're, okay. But anyway, but this would be two more safety personnel, and that would be a noticeable amendment to our force. So, but I did want to be clear on what it is, and it is one-time money.
Mr. Francisco.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to make it clear that when I talk about one-time money or reserves, what I'm really trying to do is indicate what I think the level of necessity is. I'm not suggesting that that's a long-term plan. A long-term plan is a reorganization of city departments in such a way that we can support year after year out of the general fund revenue and increase police presence. That's my goal. I don't know if we can get to that in this budget cycle. And that's why I'm saying if we have to, for this year, one-time money is actually okay, because in the long run, we're going to have to solve this problem a different way. It's just that we might not be able to do it by July 1st.
Mr. Rouse?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I go back to Deputy Chief Mannix and my request on the chief staff budget, how it trues up with that slide on personnel. Because if I look at this and I see where the parking violations revenue goes into the chief staff budget, but doesn't go into the parking enforcement, I mean, there's a gap in there where there's a surplus in that one budget. So, but the way it's printed up here, that's what I'm saying. So if you look at page 225 and then you look, I mean, there's areas that have, if we are trying to look around, which we are obviously, I just would like to get these numbers trued up with the presentation so we have, if our assignment is to say, go find the money, which our marching orders are such, I'd like to have the as much accurate information as possible so we can look at everything.
Right. Just so I'm clear, the revenue which the department receives, the vast majority of it is programmed to be received into the chief's staff. However, it is a departmental revenue. It is not considered a chief staff's revenue. So we received the bulk of our $5.4 million in departmental revenue through chief staff, but it benefits the entire police department and all the programs therein, not just the chief staff program.
Okay, and I understand that all the chief staff program represents $3,358,000 in this presentation instead of the 5.4. So, I mean, that's why it's a little confusing for us to dovetail this with our presentation today.
And we'll provide you a consolidation, but the best place to look is on page G222, where you have the entire department.
Okay.
And you'll see the revenues, and then, of course, the key line there is general fund subsidy. So after you get all those revenues, then you take the tax monies from the general fund, and that's how you balance it out. But I can assure you that there's not $1 million floating around in that budget.
Oh, I didn't think I was quite that clever, but thanks for looking.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Francisco, I completely agree with you looking down the line, trying to build up to increase the force. And if we went, as this was a first step, how would we lock into that? Would we have some sort of ad hoc committee that studied how to do this so that the next fiscal year we're not playing the same game here, but we actually have a solid program?
I would think the council needs to get to work figuring out where the money is going to come from for those positions. And I think the other thing that we need to do, obviously, is work with the department and figure out what is a feasible number of officers to add in this coming year, the following year, and the year after that. And also, what exactly does the department need when it comes to support staff? I mean, oftentimes, the civilians, who are less expensive than the sworn, they're just as important because they support our sworn officers in their duties, and they could free up sworn officers in some cases from duties that sworns don't really need to be doing. So I think it's again, what I'm saying is I think that we as the council have to come up, obviously in cooperation with the city administrator and the department, we have to come up with a longer range strategic plan. I'm thinking in terms of 3 years of how we get to the right number of officers and the right number of civilians supporting those officers. And that obviously, unless there's an economic miracle in the next year or two, is going to involve restructuring.
Right. But what are the mechanics that we do? How do we do that?
We're going to talk. That's what we do.
Oh, no. Okay, thank you.
Well, and I'll just add, 150 has been banted around quite a bit. I don't know if that's the right number. You maybe could do it for 145. I mean, really what we want is the job to get done. And, so that's why I was asking, do we have those crime stat numbers? Because people kept saying 150 was great. Well, was it or not? And I, just off the top of my head, don't know.
I think you're right, and that's, I think, what Mr. Francisco was saying. We need to look into that. Thank you.
Mr. House and then Mr. White.
After all, what we want is a safe community, and there's lots of pieces to that puzzle. And I think that fear can make us say lots of very interesting things, like using one-time money, going into reserves, those kinds of things. Somehow, will get us out of this situation. That's the mistake of the past. We aren't going to do that kind of thing, and I think it would be a grave mistake. If we're going to make a change, it's got to be a change that's going to be lasting and sustainable, and so it needs to be very carefully thought out. We don't know the impact of having these additional officers that are already in the pipe to actually getting on the street. We don't know what that feels like. We haven't had that for a long time. And when we have that and we continue to persist with year after year in keeping our strength up to the levels that have been that we're talking about, keeping them at 137 or perhaps more in authorization, I mean, I really think that we're going to be seeing a response to the concerns that we've been hearing right now. I'm gravely concerned about us going beyond a certain point where we begin to do harm to the rest of the organization that's providing other pieces of the safe community puzzle. I have a strong concern about that. So as we talk about big numbers, the fact is during the 150 days we did not have the level of automation and the work that the systems that we have right now in place that make our whole force so much more efficient. Each person is not sitting there writing out longhand those reports like they used to have to do. There's a lot of things that have happened since then. So what is that right number? Chief, the first time I met you, where we just had a chance to sit down in your office, my first question was, what's the right number? And we're right back there again, and we need to find that number and be able to work towards it strategically. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I think that both Mr. Francisco and Mr. House have brought up the point of what did that 150 do 10 years ago, and now where can we provide non-sworn resources that will maximize the efficiency of our safety staff. And I know that you folks think about it all the time, and you'll be able to advise us as we go forward. We don't need to do that today, but it definitely is a more cost-effective way to deal with the issue as well.
The other thing I might add is it goes beyond efficiency. It goes to the issue of officer safety. And we can't forget that. We do not have two-person cars like many cities. We have vehicles with one person addressing an issue. So it's certainly being efficient and effective, but it's also an officer safety issue for me. And that's something we have to consider. If we were to have 150 officers today, or July 1, and at mid-year, crime is skyrocketing, it's not because we had 150 officers. Things will happen, and they're cyclical. We'd love to say that more cops drops crime. That's not necessarily always true, or that less officer raises crime. You know, we don't have criminals sitting in a chamber today discussing how much less they're going to do because of the economic standing in society. They're continuing to commit crime. And we're continuing to try to do our best to eradicate as much of it as possible. But at the end of the day, it's those three things: efficiency, effectiveness, and equally important is officer safety.
Is there anything else about the police department budget direction to staff that you want to give at this point? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for staying with us the whole time. This meeting's adjourned.